It was just another Monday morning, or at least, that's what Mia and Max tried to tell themselves as they stood at the entrance of Jefferson High School. The big brick building loomed in front of them, its tall windows glistening in the early sunlight. They had transferred here halfway through their sophomore year, leaving behind the familiar faces of their old school and the quiet life they had known. New beginnings were always scary, but this one. It felt different. The air was thick with the unknown. As the twins stood there, side by side, their nerves palpable, Max gave Mia a quick glance. His eyes, usually calm and collected, flickered with uncertainty. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, as if that would somehow settle the storm brewing in his chest. Mia, on the other hand, tried to hide her own anxiety behind a layer of quiet confidence. She tucked a strand of her curly hair behind her ear and adjusted her hoodie, trying to ignore the small pit in her stomach. She could already hear the whispers in her head, the ones that had followed her since middle school. "You're different. You don't belong here." Her thoughts were interrupted by the shrill sound of a bell ringing from inside the school. It was time. "Ready?" Mia asked, offering Max a reassuring smile. Max nodded, though the faint tension in his shoulder suggested otherwise. "I guess as ready as I'll ever be." They walked together, their footsteps synchronizing, each knowing that today, they would have to navigate a new world, one where no one knew their names, their story, or their secret. As they stepped into the bustling hallway, a wave of unfamiliar faces greeted them. Students hurried past, most of them engaged in their own worlds, laughing, talking, and the occasional shout of greeting echoing from the lockers. Mia noticed the sea of cliques forming in every corner. The athletes here, the gamers there, the preps clustered near the windows. It was overwhelming, but not unexpected. The twins had always been different. They weren't quite like anyone else, not even in their old school. Sure, they had friends, but their closeness, their bond, was something that kept them apart from everyone else. They were a package deal, Mia and Max, the quiet twins who kept to themselves. But as they made their way to their first class of the day, they soon realized that here, their bond could either be a shield or a target. They were about to find out which. The bell rang again, and they found their way into Mrs. Caldwell's English class. The room was filled with students already settling into their seats. Mia and Max scanned the room for a place to sit, and, naturally, they gravitated toward the back, near the windows. It was quieter there, less likely to attract attention. They had learned over the years that blending in was the safest option. As they sat down, Mia's mind drifted back to what had brought them here. Their family had moved for a fresh start after their father had gotten a new job in the city. He was always supportive, but even he could sense that this transition wouldn't be easy for them. They weren't like the other kids. They were different. And that difference had always led to a certain kind of isolation. Max, always the calm one, had insisted that they could handle this, that they just had to lay low. "We're strong, Mia. We've been through worse," he had said the night before. But Mia wasn't so sure. It wasn't the physical strength she worried about, no, that was something they both had in spades. It was the social aspect. The fear of the unknown. The fear that they would never truly belong. Suddenly, a voice broke her train of thought. "Hey, new kids," a voice called out from across the room. Mia looked up to see a tall, muscular guy standing in the doorway, flanked by two of his friends. They were dressed in the typical jock attire, athletic jackets and baseball caps turned backward. His name, Mia quickly recalled, was Kyle, and he was the star quarterback of the football team. He smirked as he eyed them both, clearly sizing them up. "Welcome to Jefferson High," Kyle said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Hope you guys can keep up. You know, this school's got a unique culture. Hope you're ready for it." The students around them snickered, a few exchanging glances as if they were all in on some inside joke. Mia felt a knot form in her stomach, but she kept her head high, meeting Kyle's gaze with the same calm composure that had kept her grounded all these years. Max, sitting next to her, tensed but didn't react. He wasn't a fan of confrontation, especially when it was so blatant, but he knew when to speak up. Mia squeezed his hand beneath the desk, a silent reminder that they were in this together. Kyle seemed to enjoy the silence that followed. His eyes flicked from Mia to Max, taking note of their reserved demeanor. It was obvious they didn't fit the mold of the typical students here. Mia took a deep breath and forced a small smile. "Thanks for the warm welcome," she said, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it. She wasn't about to let him walk all over them. Kyle raised an eyebrow, surprised by her response, and for a moment, the tension between them hung in the air. He was used to people being intimidated, but Mia wasn't backing down. "Don't worry," Kyle said with a grin, "you'll fit right in. You'll see." And with that, he turned on his heel and walked to the front of the room, his friends following close behind. Mia let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The moment had passed, but she knew this wasn't the last time they would encounter Kyle or his crew. Max leaned over and whispered, "Well, that was something." Mia nodded, glancing at the door. She couldn't shake the feeling that today was just the beginning of something bigger. Something that would test them in ways they hadn't anticipated. "Yeah," Mia said quietly. "Something tells me this is just the start." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The bell rang, signaling the start of the next class, and Mia and Max filed out of the English room in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The brief exchange with Kyle lingered in Mia's mind, but it was more than just the words that unsettled her, it was the look in his eyes. She had seen that kind of arrogance before, and it wasn't something she took lightly. She could feel the weight of the moment, but she didn't let it show on her face. As they walked through the crowded hallway, their footsteps muffled by the chatter of their classmates, Max caught her eye. He was deep in thought, too. "Do you think we'll make it through here?" he asked, his voice soft, but there was an edge of uncertainty in it. Mia paused for a moment, looking up at her twin brother. It was rare for Max to show doubt. He was usually the more composed one, the rock that kept them steady. But even he was feeling the weight of their new reality. "I don't know," Mia admitted. "But we've gotten through worse, right?" Max nodded, the familiar words offering a small comfort. Their journey had never been easy, but it had always been worth it. They had survived a lot together, and if there was one thing they both knew, it was that they could handle whatever life threw their way. The truth was, the twins had always been different. They weren't like the other kids in their schools. They were quieter, more reserved, and their bond went beyond the typical sibling relationship. Mia and Max had always been in sync, almost as if they could read each other's minds. They shared everything, fears, dreams, even the smallest of secrets. But there was one secret they kept to themselves, one that had shaped who they were, their martial arts training. It had started when they were just kids, watching their father practice in the garage late at night. He was a man of few words, but there was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, the grace and power in each punch and kick. He had been a black belt champion in his younger years, traveling the world, competing, and winning titles. But after an injury forced him to retire, he had turned his focus to teaching Mia and Max. At first, it had just been a way to keep them busy, a way to bond as a family. But as the years passed, their training became something more. It was a way of life. It was their strength. Their father had never forced them into it, but he had always encouraged them to push themselves, to be the best version of themselves, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Mia still remembered the first time their father had sparred with them, not holding back, showing them the power of their own potential. She had been shocked at how quickly she had learned, how natural the movements felt. Max, always the more methodical one, had approached martial arts like a puzzle, carefully studying every move, every technique, until it became second nature to him. But it wasn't just the physical aspect that had changed them. Martial arts had taught them discipline, respect, and the ability to stay calm in the face of danger. It had taught them how to control their emotions, to harness their fears and doubts and turn them into fuel for their growth. They had both earned their black belts by the time they were 13, but it wasn't something they bragged about. It was a part of them, like a secret weapon they kept hidden. They knew how easily people could underestimate them if they thought they were just quiet, unassuming twins. But that silence. It was a shield. And the strength they had built over the years. That was their real weapon. As they made their way to their next class, Mia couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She had always been protective of Max, always tried to shield him from the things that hurt him. And now, as they stepped into this new world, she could feel the familiar pull of needing to keep him safe. But there was something different this time. This time, she couldn't just hide behind her protective instincts. She would need to confront what was coming, whatever it was, and she would need to do it alongside Max. They entered their next class, algebra, and took their seats near the back of the room again, just as they had in English. Mia looked around, taking in the faces of her new classmates. Most of them were too absorbed in their phones or in their own conversations to notice the twins. But she knew that wouldn't last long. Max, ever the quiet one, took out his notebook and began to scribble down the assignment. Mia, however, couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was coming. She knew that Kyle and his friends would be back. They always came back. And then it happened. It was near the end of the class when the door swung open, and Kyle strolled in with a grin plastered across his face. He was late, but no one said anything. He was a star athlete, after all. He had a way of getting away with things that no one else could. As he passed the twins' desk, he shot them a pointed look, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. Mia held his gaze, trying to show no fear, but the knot in her stomach tightened. "Hey, new kids," Kyle said loud enough for the whole class to hear. "Don't think I didn't see you back there. You might want to learn how to blend in better if you don't want to make waves around here." His words hung in the air like a threat, though he said it with a casual smile, as though he were offering friendly advice. The entire class fell silent, and for a moment, Mia could feel the weight of the room's attention on them. She could hear the whispers start, the quiet hum of curiosity from the other students. Kyle's words weren't just about the twins, they were a challenge, a way to test their limits. Max's fingers curled around his pen, but he didn't say anything. He knew better. Mia could feel his eyes on her, waiting for her to decide how to respond. Mia swallowed hard and looked back at Kyle. "We're not here to make waves, Kyle," she said, her voice steady. "We're just here to learn." Kyle's grin widened, but he didn't say anything else. He turned away, moving to his seat in the front of the room, but the tension lingered in the air. Mia could feel it, could feel the weight of the unspoken challenge hanging between them. The rest of the class continued, but Mia couldn't focus. She had felt that challenge before, the one where people tried to push you into a corner, to see if you would back down. But Mia had never been the type to back down. And neither was Max. As the bell rang again, signaling the end of the class, Mia packed up her things quickly, but she didn't leave right away. She turned to Max and whispered, "This isn't over." "Not by a long shot." Max nodded, his eyes narrowing with determination. "I know. But we're ready for whatever comes next." The halls of Jefferson High felt even more suffocating as the days passed. With each passing moment, Mia and Max learned more about the unspoken rules of their new school. It wasn't just about grades or social standing. It was about survival. The game was rigged, and they were playing on the outside, trying to figure out the rules. By the end of the week, they had learned enough to know where they stood, different, isolated, and very much on the radar of Kyle and his group. Mia wasn't sure whether it was because they were the new kids, or something else entirely. But it didn't matter. They had been here long enough to feel the pressure mounting. And it wasn't just the constant stares from the other students. It wasn't just the little comments that slipped through the cracks. It was Kyle, again. Kyle and his friends had made a habit of making them feel uncomfortable, lurking in the corners of the halls, always waiting for a chance to strike. They had been subtle at first, a few side glances, a sarcastic remark here and there. But Mia and Max knew that these weren't just playful jabs. They were tests. Kyle wanted to see how far he could push them, how much he could get away with. It was during lunch when the tension finally broke. Mia and Max sat at their usual table, tucked away in the far corner of the cafeteria, trying their best to stay under the radar. The last thing they wanted was to attract attention. The cafeteria was a noisy, chaotic place where groups of students gathered, talking, laughing, and sometimes, with a glance, sizing each other up. But today, that wasn't the case for the twins. Kyle and his friends appeared from the far side of the cafeteria, strolling in like they owned the place. Their loud voices cut through the chatter, and Mia instinctively tensed, knowing that they were coming closer. Max was already looking at her, his gaze meeting hers in silent understanding. The moment they had been waiting for had arrived. Without a word, Kyle approached their table, flanked by his two friends, Brad and Eric, both of whom were built like linebackers, their broad shoulders and sneers making them look even more intimidating. Kyle flashed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes as he stood directly in front of Mia and Max. Well, he drawled, his voice too loud, too confident. The new kids. Still hiding back here? I would have thought you'd want to sit with the rest of us by now. He looked down at them, his gaze flicking over their trays of food with an air of disdain. Mia kept her face neutral, her gaze unwavering. She wasn't going to let him provoke her into saying something she'd regret. She had been through enough already. But she wasn't about to let him walk all over them either. Max shifted in his seat, looking at Mia briefly before turning his attention to Kyle. "We're fine here," he said, his tone steady, but there was an edge to his voice. Max didn't often speak up in public situations like this, but when it came to protecting Mia, he wasn't afraid to stand his ground. Kyle's grin widened as he leaned in slightly. "Oh, I bet you are. But you're kind of drawing attention to yourselves. And that's not usually a good thing around here, is it?" He leaned closer, and for a brief moment, Mia could see the flicker of something darker in his eyes. It wasn't just about the table. It was about control. He wanted them to feel small, to feel like they didn't belong. Mia could feel the heat rising in her chest, but she kept her voice low and steady. "We didn't ask for your attention, Kyle. And we don't need your approval to fit in." The words hung in the air, heavy and challenging. The table fell silent for a moment, the tension thick. Max shot her a look, as if to say, "Don't make it worse." But Mia wasn't backing down. Not now. Kyle, on the other hand, wasn't used to people speaking back to him. For a moment, his confident exterior faltered, and his smirk disappeared. He wasn't sure how to respond to someone who didn't cower, someone who didn't crack under his usual intimidation tactics. Brad, his sidekick, stepped forward, his muscles bulging beneath his Letterman jacket. "You don't get it, do you?" he sneered. "Around here, it's about knowing your place. And right now, you two are way out of yours." Mia stood up slowly, feeling the eyes of the cafeteria on her. She wasn't about to let him walk all over her brother, or her. She was about to say something, but before she could, Max stood up beside her, his movements calm but firm. Max said, his voice low but clear, "we don't want trouble. But if you want to keep pushing, Kyle, we'll make sure you regret it." Kyle raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Max's calm confidence. He had expected a reaction, something more emotional, something he could use against them. But Max was giving him nothing. Mia placed a hand on her brother's arm, signaling for him to step back. It wasn't the right time for a confrontation, not yet. "We're not here to fight," she said, her voice controlled. "But you don't get to treat us like this. Not now. Not ever." Kyle stood there for a moment, sizing them up. Then, with a shrug, he turned his back and walked away, his friends following suit. But before he disappeared into the crowd, he turned over his shoulder with a final comment. "We'll see how long that attitude lasts around here." Mia and Max exchanged glances, their hearts pounding in their chests. The brief moment of tension had passed, but the storm was far from over. They knew this was just the beginning. Kyle would be back, and next time, it might be worse. But there was something else, too. Something that lingered in the air between them after Kyle had walked off. They had faced him, head-on, without fear. And for the first time, Mia felt something shift inside her. They weren't just the quiet twins anymore. They weren't going to hide. They had a strength of their own. And if anyone was going to mess with them, they would find out just how powerful that strength could be. The days that followed felt like a battle of tension and silence. After the incident in the cafeteria, things between Mia, Max, and Kyle had grown strained. The stares they received were different now, more curious, more calculating. It was as if Kyle's little display had stirred something in the school's social hierarchy. No one knew exactly what to expect next, but the ripple effects were palpable. As for the twins, they spent their days navigating the uneasy atmosphere. They had grown used to being outsiders, but the situation at Jefferson High was different. People weren't just ignoring them, they were actively watching them, waiting for the next move. By Monday, word had already spread about what happened during lunch. The whispers in the hallway had a new undercurrent. People were talking about the twins, about how they'd stood up to Kyle without flinching. Some were even impressed. Others? Well, they weren't as thrilled. But Mia and Max weren't interested in the gossip. They had one goal, getting through each day, sticking together, and keeping their heads down. The problem with that approach, however, was that it never lasted long. They were walking a fine line, and every now and then, a careless mistake could send everything toppling. The next time trouble found them, it wasn't in the form of Kyle or his crew. It was their first gym class. They had arrived early, as usual, and found a spot on the bleachers to change into their gym clothes. The gymnasium was large and open, echoing with the sound of basketballs bouncing and sneakers skidding on the polished floor. The other students were already scattered around, some chatting with friends, others shooting hoops or getting ready for the day's activities. Mia glanced around, taking in the chaos. There was a sense of normalcy to it all, a sense of belonging that they weren't a part of. They were the new kids, the ones everyone looked at with curiosity, but no one really wanted to befriend. Max was adjusting his laces when Mia's attention was caught by the loud voices coming from the far end of the gym. Her eyes narrowed instinctively, and she leaned in closer to her brother. "That's him," Mia said quietly. "Kyle." Max's gaze shifted toward the noise. Kyle was already on the court, dribbling a basketball, with Brad and Eric standing nearby. They were laughing, as usual, making the scene look like a typical high school moment. But the way Kyle was grinning at the twins told a different story. It was the same look he had given them in the cafeteria, like he was trying to figure them out. And that wasn't something Mia was going to stand for. The gym teacher, Mr. Lawson, a tall man with a booming voice, clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, team. Let's get started. Everyone on the court for some drills." Mia and Max stood up, walking toward the court with a practiced calm. They had always been quick on their feet, and they had learned to move through the world like shadows, silent, unnoticed, until they needed to be seen. As they approached the group, they noticed Kyle's eyes follow them, tracking their every move. Mia's heart pounded. She could feel the weight of the situation growing. This wasn't just gym class anymore. This was their test. The drill for the day was basic basketball, passing, shooting, and dribbling. It was the kind of exercise that forced everyone to participate, even the ones who didn't care for sports. Mia and Max, who had never been big into team sports, looked at each other. They didn't mind the exercise, it was the people they were concerned about. Mia was about to step onto the court when she felt a shove from behind. She spun around, her body instinctively tensing. There was Brad, his smirk just as wide as ever. "Watch where you're going, freak," he sneered, pushing her again. Max was at her side in an instant, stepping between her and Brad, his expression unreadable. "Don't touch her," he said quietly, his voice colder than it had ever been before. Brad, surprised by Max's firmness, scowled. "What are you gonna do about it, tough guy?" Mia could see the moment when Brad realized he had underestimated Max. Max wasn't some shy, quiet kid anymore. He was standing his ground, calm and controlled, every inch the black belt his father had raised him to be. But before either of them could say anything further, Kyle's voice cut through the tension. "Enough, Brad," he called, his tone deceptively casual. "Let them be. They're not worth it." Mia's eyes locked with Kyle's for a moment. He was testing them, that much was clear. He was trying to see how far he could push them before they snapped. And this time, Mia wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Max stood his ground. "Thanks, but no thanks," he said, not looking at Kyle, but speaking with such force that it stopped Brad from trying anything further. The gym teacher, Mr. Lawson, blew his whistle, signaling the start of the drill. "Let's go, guys, no more messing around. You two, get on the court." Mia and Max exchanged a glance before stepping forward. They didn't let their attention waver from the game, but they could feel the eyes on them. They were being watched. Their every move was being judged. The drill began. Mia and Max kept to themselves, passing the ball back and forth, focusing on the task at hand. They were good. The basketball hoop was a distant target, but they didn't need to aim for it. What mattered was how they moved, how they reacted. Max was quick on his feet, weaving in and out of the defenders like he'd been playing basketball for years. Mia was just as fast, her coordination sharp as she passed the ball with perfect timing. It didn't take long before Mr. Lawson's eyes were on them, impressed by their natural agility. But it was Kyle who noticed first. "Not bad," he called from the sideline, his tone dripping with a kind of false admiration. "You two are better than I thought." Mia glanced over, meeting Kyle's gaze head-on. She didn't flinch. "Thanks," she said, her voice steady, controlled. Kyle's smile faded for just a second, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "You know, I think I might have to take you two down a peg or two sometime," he said, though it was clear he wasn't making it as a compliment. Max and Mia exchanged a quiet, knowing look. They had passed this test, but Kyle wasn't done. And they knew it. The next few days were a mixture of calm and mounting tension. After the gym class incident, things had settled somewhat, but everyone at Jefferson High knew that what happened on the court wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning. Kyle's pride had been bruised, and he wasn't going to let that slide. Mia and Max, on the other hand, were determined to keep their heads low. They had proven themselves on the court, showing they weren't afraid to stand their ground. But that wasn't going to stop Kyle from trying to break them. In fact, it might have made them even more of a target. They weren't foolish enough to believe the situation was over, but they weren't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing them sweat. They kept their focus on their studies, each other, and maintaining their distance from the chaos that surrounded them. It wasn't long before they got their first hint of what Kyle was planning next. It started with a simple note. Mia was walking to her locker after third period when she noticed a small piece of paper wedged between the metal door and the locker frame. She stopped, her hand hesitating before she picked it up. The handwriting was familiar. It was Kyle's. She unfolded it quickly, her eyes scanning the words. "You think you're tough? Prove it. Meet me after school by the gym. I dare you." Mia's stomach dropped, and she quickly scanned the hallway to make sure no one had seen her. She stuffed the note into her backpack, trying to steady her breathing. The feeling of dread settled deep in her chest. This was the moment she had been waiting for, where Kyle would stop with the games and take things to the next level. She didn't need to say anything to Max right away. They both knew what was coming. When school ended, Mia found Max outside, waiting for her near the parking lot. His eyes flicked to her face immediately, and he saw the concern in her expression. "I got a note," she said quietly, her voice low but firm. "Kyle wants us to meet him after school. By the gym." Max's brows furrowed. "This is it, huh? The real test." Mia nodded. She could feel the weight of the decision hanging between them. This wasn't just about surviving high school anymore, it was about standing up for themselves, proving that they wouldn't be pushed around. "We don't back down," Max said with a determination that matched Mia's. "Let's go." The gym was nearly empty when they arrived, the sounds of footsteps echoing through the otherwise silent space. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the air smelled faintly of sweat and polished wood. It was a place where games were played, and fights, both physical and mental, happened. They stood just outside the gym doors, waiting. Neither of them spoke, but they both knew what this moment meant. They could feel the impending storm, the tension that had been building for days. Kyle had been testing them, now it was time to face the consequences. Finally, Kyle's voice broke the silence, and the twins turned toward him. He was standing near the far end of the gym, his arms crossed over his chest, flanked by Brad and Eric. As usual, his presence was imposing, his posture confident. "Well, well," Kyle said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like the twins finally decided to show up. I was starting to think you'd chicken out." Mia and Max didn't say anything at first, but they kept their heads high, their bodies relaxed, their stance strong. They weren't about to let him see them sweat. "So, what's this about, Kyle?" Max asked, his voice even, though there was a fire behind it. "You want to fight? Is that it?" Kyle smirked, glancing at Brad and Eric, who stood behind him with their arms crossed, their faces hard. "Oh, not a fight," Kyle said, his tone turning cold. "I just want to see what you two are made of. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But let's see how tough you really are. I'm calling you out. Prove it." Mia's heart began to pound in her chest. This wasn't a casual challenge. This was a fight, one where they would be expected to give everything they had, and more. Max stepped forward. "What do you want us to do?" he asked, his voice still calm but with a sharp edge. Kyle grinned, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was predatory, as if he knew exactly how far he could push them. "It's simple," he said. "A little sparring match. No weapons. Just you two against Brad and Eric." Max didn't hesitate. He looked at Mia for a brief moment, gauging her response. Then he turned back to Kyle. "Fine," Max said, his jaw clenched. "But don't expect us to go easy on you." Kyle's smile widened, and he stepped back. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Brad and Eric stepped forward, stretching their arms and cracking their knuckles. The tension in the air thickened, and Mia could feel her pulse racing. She knew they couldn't back down now. Kyle had made it clear, this was no longer about making fun of them. This was about forcing them to show their strength, and testing how far they were willing to go. Max and Mia stood side by side, their bodies mirroring each other's movements. They had trained for this, although not in the way Kyle thought. Their real fight wasn't about physical strength, it was about control. Focus. And most importantly, knowing how to use the skills they had developed in silence. The match began. Brad came at Max first, throwing a wild punch that Max dodged effortlessly, countering with a quick jab to his stomach. Eric lunged at Mia, but she was already one step ahead. She sidestepped his grab, using his momentum to send him crashing into the gym wall. Kyle watched, an amused expression on his face. "Impressive," he muttered, but there was something darker in his eyes, something that didn't quite match his words. Max and Mia were holding their own, but it was clear that Kyle's friends weren't going to make it easy. They were bigger, faster, and they had numbers on their side. But that didn't matter. Mia's mind was sharp, and she could hear the rhythmic sound of her breathing as she maneuvered around Eric's attacks. She could feel her body moving instinctively, her black belt training taking over. The world slowed down around her as she focused on the task at hand. Max wasn't far behind, his every movement precise. He'd been training for this moment longer than anyone knew. He wasn't going to let Kyle's game break them. The fight raged on, a dance of speed and precision, with Brad and Eric getting more frustrated as Mia and Max's skill shone through. Kyle, still standing by the sidelines, watched with narrowed eyes. This wasn't the end. But it was a beginning. And for the first time since they'd arrived at Jefferson High, Mia and Max felt what it was like to finally take control. The gym was thick with the sound of fists connecting with bodies and the shuffle of feet on the wooden floor. Max and Mia, though outnumbered and under pressure, were holding their ground. They moved with a fluidity that betrayed their years of training. Each strike, dodge, and counter was instinctive, as if their bodies had learned to respond before their minds could catch up. Eric, who had initially seemed like a formidable opponent, was struggling. Mia's speed and precision left him grasping at air, and every time he tried to land a blow, he only met the unforgiving force of her defensive techniques. Max was doing just as well against Brad, whose aggressive swings couldn't catch the younger twin. It was clear that Max's calm demeanor and confidence were rattling Brad, whose frustration was starting to show. "Come on, hit them!" Kyle shouted from the sidelines, his voice dripping with impatience and a hint of anger. He didn't seem to care about the bruises his friends were taking. It was all part of his sick game, pushing them to break, to lose control. But Mia and Max weren't backing down. They had spent their entire lives training for moments like this, times when they were pushed to the brink, when everything seemed to be against them. This was their moment to show everyone, including Kyle, just how much they could take. Brad lunged at Max again, this time aiming a punch directly at his face. Max sidestepped effortlessly, his footwork perfect, and with a quick twist of his body, he spun around, delivering a precise kick to Brad's midsection. The force knocked the wind out of him, sending Brad stumbling backward. Meanwhile, Mia was having her own battle with Eric. She ducked under a wild punch, grabbed his arm, and twisted it behind his back. Eric gasped in pain, his body stiffening as he tried to pull away. But Mia's grip was unyielding. With a swift motion, she threw him to the ground, holding him down until he stopped struggling. The gym fell silent for a brief moment as Eric lay on the floor, gasping for air, and Brad staggered to his feet, clutching his ribs. Both were visibly shaken, but the most unsettling part of the scene was Kyle. His eyes, once filled with arrogant amusement, were now narrowed and focused. There was a hint of disbelief in his expression, as if he hadn't expected the twins to be this skilled, this strong. He motioned for Brad and Eric to get up. "You guys need to step it up," Kyle snapped, frustration seeping into his voice. "I didn't bring you here to lose to a couple of freaks." Brad and Eric exchanged looks, their faces flushed with anger and embarrassment, but neither of them made a move toward Mia or Max just yet. They were intimidated, no longer sure of themselves. They had underestimated the twins, and now they were paying for it. Max and Mia stood tall, their breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through their veins. They hadn't come here looking for a fight, but they weren't going to let Kyle's taunts slide either. The message had been clear from the start, Kyle wanted to see if they could be broken. And with every move, every defense, Mia and Max were proving that no matter how hard Kyle tried, they wouldn't bend. Kyle finally stepped forward, his face twisted with a mix of disbelief and fury. "You know what?" he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "I thought you two might actually be worth something. But all you've done is make me sick." Mia met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "You were never worth our time, Kyle." Kyle's eyes flickered with surprise at her response, but he quickly recovered, regaining his composure. "Don't think this is over," he warned, his tone low and threatening. "You're not going to win here. Not with me." Max, ever the calm one, raised an eyebrow. "Is that a challenge?" Kyle's smirk reappeared, but this time, it wasn't playful. It was cold, calculating. Maybe it is. Before anything else could be said, the shrill sound of a whistle cut through the air. Mr. Lawson, the gym teacher, had entered the gym, his eyes scanning the scene before landing on the twins and their opponents. He took one look at the bruises forming on Brad and Eric's faces, the tension in the air, and then he turned to Kyle. "Kyle, what's going on here?" Mr. Lawson asked, his voice stern. Kyle's expression shifted from amusement to feigned innocence. "Nothing, Mr. Lawson. Just some friendly sparring." "Friendly sparring?" Mr. Lawson's eyebrows shot up. "I don't think I'm seeing friendly here, Kyle. What is this really about?" Mia stepped forward, her voice firm. "He's been bullying us ever since we got here. We tried to ignore it, but now it's escalated." Max nodded in agreement. "This isn't just sparring. This is a setup. He's trying to break us." Mr. Lawson's gaze hardened. "Kyle, I don't tolerate this kind of behavior in my gym. You'll be reporting to the principal's office." Kyle's face flushed with anger, but he didn't argue. He knew he had pushed things too far. "Fine," he spat, his tone full of venom. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Mia and Max stood their ground, their eyes locked on Kyle's. He was angry, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere now. They had shown him that they weren't the easy targets he had assumed them to be. And that realization would stick with him, whether he liked it or not. As Kyle was escorted out of the gym, Mr. Lawson turned to Mia and Max. "You two are lucky I was here," he said, his voice still stern but with a hint of approval. "I don't like what I saw, but I'm glad you can defend yourselves. Just, next time, try not to let it get this far." Max nodded. "We didn't start it. But we won't back down." Mia added, her voice steady, "We're not going to let anyone push us around. Not now, not ever." Mr. Lawson gave them a long look before sighing. "All right. But be careful. This school isn't kind to people who stand out." The twins exchanged a glance. "We can handle it," Max said quietly. As they left the gym, the weight of the fight started to sink in. They had won this round. But they both knew that Kyle wasn't done with them yet. And the real challenge was still ahead. The next day at school, the air seemed thicker than usual. Whispers filled the hallways, eyes flickered nervously as Mia and Max walked through the corridors. The aftermath of yesterday's showdown with Kyle and his friends was still fresh in everyone's mind. It was impossible to ignore the electric buzz of tension that followed them everywhere they went. But despite the awkward glances and hushed conversations, neither Mia nor Max let it affect them. They'd stood their ground in the gym, and they weren't about to let anyone intimidate them now. Mia was used to being watched, but today it felt different. There was something about the way people looked at her and Max that made her feel exposed. She could see the curiosity in their eyes, but also something else. Fear. Admiration. It was hard to say. She wasn't sure what the students thought of them now, but one thing was clear, the twins had earned their attention. But the real question was, what did Kyle think? And what would he do next? At lunch, Mia and Max sat at their usual table in the back corner of the cafeteria, away from the chaos of the rest of the students. The cafeteria was filled with the usual lunchtime chatter, but today, it felt like the noise was muted in the background as they focused on their food. Mia pushed her salad around the plate, her mind not really on the meal but on the events that had transpired. Max was quiet as well, but it wasn't the same kind of silence. It was the kind that came from thinking. Deep thinking. He was usually the one who liked to keep everything inside, but even he couldn't ignore the weight of what had happened. So, Mia broke the silence, her voice low. "What do you think Kyle's going to do now?" Max leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the cafeteria. "I don't know. But I'm sure he's not just going to let it slide. He's probably already plotting something." Mia sighed. I don't get him. I thought he'd just move on, but yesterday wasn't just about proving who's stronger. It felt like he wanted something more. Max glanced at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. Yeah. It was personal. He's been targeting us from the start, trying to break us down. Yesterday was a test. But we passed it. Mia nodded. We did. But I don't think Kyle's the type to give up easily. And if he's mad now, he's going to come at us even harder. Max didn't respond immediately. He understood exactly what Mia meant. The kind of person Kyle was, the kind of person who needed to be in control, who couldn't stand the idea of being outshined or outdone. It wasn't just about bullying them anymore. It was about his pride. And once his pride was wounded, there was no telling how far he would go to reclaim it. Max looked at Mia, his expression serious. We need to be ready. We can't let our guard down. She met his gaze. I know. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Mia stood up, grabbing her tray and heading toward the trash cans, but as she walked past a group of students at the next table, one of them, a girl named Ashley, called out to her. Hey, Mia. Max. You're not gonna let Kyle get away with that, right? Mia froze. She hadn't expected anyone to approach them directly. She turned slowly, meeting Ashley's gaze. The girl's face was filled with genuine concern, and Mia could tell she wasn't the only one who had been watching the confrontation in the gym. A few other students at the table were looking at them too, their faces full of curiosity and, surprisingly, respect. We saw what happened yesterday, Ashley continued. I want you guys to know, not everyone thinks Kyle's right. You don't deserve what he's been doing. Max and Mia exchanged a glance, surprised by the unexpected support. It wasn't that they hadn't thought anyone might stand with them, they had just assumed the general response would be more fear, more avoidance. But this? This was different. Thanks, Mia said, her voice a bit hesitant but sincere. We're not gonna back down. Ashley smiled, nodding. Good. I don't know if the rest of the school's ready to deal with you too, but I can tell you this, Kyle's gonna have a hard time keeping this up if people start seeing him for who he really is. Max nodded silently, but his mind was already racing. Could this be a turning point? Could the tide be shifting? Before Mia and Max could say anything else, the bell rang again, signaling the start of the next class. Mia and Max gathered their things, exchanged one more look, and made their way out of the cafeteria, unsure of what the next day might bring but determined to face it head-on. But the real test was still to come. As the school day drew to a close, the hallways buzzed with activity. Students hurried from class to class, some talking excitedly about the events of the past few days, others anxious, looking over their shoulders as they rushed through the halls. But no matter how much the school tried to return to normal, there was an undercurrent of change, an electricity that wasn't there before. Kyle was everywhere. Mia could feel his presence in every hallway, in every classroom, as if he was lurking just around the corner, waiting for the right moment to strike. But something was different now. It wasn't just about him trying to tear them down, it was about him trying to regain control of the narrative. He was looking for a way to reassert his dominance, to show everyone that what happened in the gym was a fluke. But Mia and Max knew better. They were no longer the targets. They were a threat. By the time the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Mia and Max walked out of Jefferson High with their heads held high. They didn't know what Kyle's next move would be, but they were ready. They had proven themselves in the gym, and now it was time to prove themselves once more. But little did they know, things were about to escalate even further than they could have ever anticipated. The evening after school was quiet, too quiet. Max sat in his room, staring at the dimly lit screen of his phone, scrolling through social media. He had expected the usual flood of notifications, friends tagging him in posts, people commenting on photos from school, but instead, everything felt oddly still. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He thought back to the cafeteria earlier that day, when Ashley and a few other students had spoken up in their defense. It was a strange feeling, realizing that people were starting to look at them differently. Not as the new kids, or the ones to be picked on, but as people who could stand their ground and demand respect. But that thought was fleeting. The reality was, Kyle was not the type to let things slide. Max knew, deep down, that the peace they were experiencing was just the calm before the storm. Kyle wouldn't take this loss lightly. Max's phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from Mia. "Mia, you good?" Max replied almost immediately, his fingers moving quickly on the screen. "Max, yeah. Just thinking." He didn't need to elaborate. Mia knew him well enough to understand. She was probably thinking the same things. They both knew that whatever Kyle had planned, it would happen soon. And when it did, they had to be ready. The door to Max's room creaked open, and his dad, Tom, stepped inside. His tall frame filled the doorway, and Max couldn't help but notice the concerned expression on his father's face. "Hey, buddy," Tom said softly. "You okay?" Max looked up from his phone, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind, you know." His dad nodded, walking over to the chair by Max's desk and sitting down. "I know. Things have been tough, huh?" Max didn't answer right away. He didn't want to worry his dad, but the truth was, he felt the weight of the situation more than he cared to admit. The tension with Kyle was far from over, and even if the school had been quiet today, he knew it wouldn't last. "We'll handle it," Max said finally, trying to sound confident. "Mia and we're used to this kind of stuff." Tom raised an eyebrow, a wry smile forming on his lips. "You sure? You've been through a lot in your life, but this is a new one for me." Max chuckled softly, though the sound felt forced. "We've dealt with worse." Tom didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply sat there, watching Max carefully. After a long moment, he spoke again, his tone more serious. "I don't want to see you hurt, son. You and Mia, you're both strong, but there's more to life than just fighting back. I know you've got a lot of pride, but it's okay to lean on people sometimes. You don't always have to do everything on your own." Max nodded, his chest tightening at the thought of how much his dad had done for him and Mia. He knew his father was right. But right now, there wasn't much he could lean on. He couldn't let his guard down. Not with Kyle still out there, watching and waiting. "I get it, Dad," Max said, his voice quieter. "I won't let it get out of hand." Tom smiled, standing up and ruffling Max's hair in that way he always did. "Just make sure you and Mia stick together. You've got each other's backs, all right?" Max nodded again, forcing a smile as his dad left the room. His words stayed with him, though, hanging in the air like a promise. It wasn't just about physical strength. It was about something deeper. Something that the twins had built over years of hardship, trust. As the evening wore on, Max felt a growing sense of unease. His dad was right, of course. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming, something that would push both him and Mia to their limits. The next morning at school, things were quiet again. Too quiet. Mia and Max walked into the building, their usual sense of unease creeping up on them. They both knew that nothing was ever truly quiet at Jefferson High. Something was about to happen. They could feel it. They made their way through the halls, and as they turned a corner, they saw Kyle and his crew up ahead. Kyle was standing near the lockers with Brad and Eric, their backs to the twins. Kyle was speaking animatedly, gesturing with his hands as he laughed with his friends. But when he saw Mia and Max approaching, his expression shifted. He stood up straighter, a smug grin spreading across his face. Well, he said loudly, enough for others to hear. "If it isn't the heroes of the gym. Think you two are tough, huh? Mia's eyes narrowed as she stopped a few feet away from him. She wasn't intimidated, not anymore. What do you want, Kyle? Kyle's grin only grew wider. You know, I was thinking. Yesterday, you two got lucky. But lucky doesn't last forever. Max stepped up beside Mia, his voice steady. What's your point? I'm challenging you, Kyle said, his eyes glinting with malice. I've talked to Mr. Lawson, and he said we could settle this the right way. A fight. A real one. You and me, in the ring. No more games. Mia blinked, the challenge hanging in the air between them. She could feel Max's hand subtly brushing against hers, a silent signal of unity. You really want to go there, Kyle? Max asked, his voice calm but firm. You sure this is what you want? Kyle's gaze was unwavering. You two think you're better than me. But you're not. I'm gonna prove it to you. This isn't just about fighting, this is about who runs this school. And it's gonna be me. The challenge was set. A fight. A chance for Kyle to reclaim control, to prove to everyone that the twins weren't untouchable. Mia and Max exchanged a glance, then nodded. We'll be there, Mia said, her voice cold. Kyle gave a satisfied smirk, clearly expecting them to back down. Good. We'll see you at the gym. And don't be late. As Kyle walked away, Brad and Eric following him with smirks on their faces, Mia and Max stood there for a moment, the weight of the challenge sinking in. They'd faced so much already, but this felt different. Kyle wasn't just testing them anymore. He was trying to break them. But Mia and Max were ready. They had no choice. They would show Kyle, once and for all, that no one could break them. The morning of the fight arrived with a strange sense of inevitability. Jefferson High felt different, like a calm before a massive storm. The hallways were quieter than usual, the students glancing at one another with hushed anticipation. Mia and Max could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on them as they made their way to the gym, their footsteps echoing in the silence that hung over the school. Today wasn't going to be just any day. Today, the showdown with Kyle would happen, and everything they had worked for, their strength, their unity, the sacrifices they had made, would be tested. As they walked into the gym, the fluorescent lights above flickered, casting an eerie glow across the room. The bleachers were mostly empty, but a small crowd of students had gathered around a makeshift ring at the center of the gym. They stood in clusters, whispering among themselves, eyes flicking toward the twins as they entered. Mia could feel the tension in the air. It was thick, almost suffocating. Kyle was already in the ring, his arms crossed over his chest, staring down at them with that same smug grin. Brad and Eric stood on either side of him, looking like they were ready to pounce at the first sign of weakness. So, you two actually showed up, Kyle sneered as Mia and Max climbed into the ring, their eyes locked on him. I was beginning to think you were too scared to face me. Mia didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. She had nothing to prove to him anymore. She was beyond his taunts. But Max, ever the calm and calculating one, stepped forward. We don't scare easy, Kyle, Max said, his voice cool. But we'll see how tough you really are when it's just you and me. The crowd grew quieter, the excitement palpable. It was clear that Kyle's reputation was on the line, but so was theirs. The gym felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the first move. All right, Mr. Lawson, the gym teacher, spoke up from the sidelines. Everyone knows the rules. This is just a sparring match, no cheap shots, no low blows. You two keep it fair, and we'll call it a day. Got it? Both Kyle and Max nodded, though Kyle's grin never faltered. The fight wasn't just about winning, it was about proving who was in charge. For Kyle, this wasn't about pride anymore, it was about vengeance. But for Mia and Max, this fight was about something deeper. It was about standing up for themselves, about showing the school that they were more than the victims of bullying. Mia stepped back, standing near the edge of the ring as she watched the two boys square off. Her heart raced, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. She knew Max. She knew his strength, his skill. And she knew that, together, they were unstoppable. Mr. Lawson blew his whistle, signaling the start of the match. Kyle lunged first, charging at Max with surprising speed, his fists raised. Max sidestepped him effortlessly, a move so fluid it almost looked like a dance. He let Kyle charge at him a second time, his body coiling like a spring, ready to strike. When Kyle lunged again, Max stepped to the side, grabbed his arm, and twisted it behind his back with a fluid motion, throwing him to the mat with ease. The crowd gasped. It was over before it had even truly begun. Kyle scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell?" he shouted, brushing dirt from his clothes. "Get up, you idiot," he snapped at his friends. Brad and Eric looked confused for a moment, unsure if they should intervene. But Kyle waved them off, his eyes burning with fury. He wasn't about to let this defeat define him. The next few seconds passed in a blur. Kyle launched himself at Max again, this time trying to land a punch. Max, with the skill and precision that Mia knew all too well, easily dodged the punch and countered with a swift strike to Kyle's midsection. Kyle's breath left him in a painful gasp, and he staggered backward, but he didn't fall. He wasn't done yet. Max took a step back, his stance firm but calm. "You're stronger than you look, Kyle," Max said with a hint of respect in his voice. "But you're not thinking. You're letting your anger control you." Kyle wiped sweat from his forehead, glaring at Max. "I'm not done yet," he growled, charging again, faster this time. But Max was ready. As Kyle closed the distance, Max dropped low, ducking under his punch and sweeping Kyle's legs out from beneath him, sending him crashing to the mat once again. The sound of Kyle's body hitting the floor echoed through the gym, and this time, he didn't get up right away. The crowd was silent for a moment, before someone in the back whispered, "Did Max just?" Mr. Lawson stepped forward, raising his whistle. "All right, that's enough. Kyle, you okay?" Kyle lay on the floor for a moment, gasping for air. His face was twisted in frustration and embarrassment. This wasn't how he had imagined it. He had come in with the intention of humiliating the twins, of proving his superiority. But now, all he had was a bruised ego. He slowly pushed himself to his feet, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His fists were clenched at his sides, but there was a look of resignation on his face that hadn't been there before. The crowd, which had been silent throughout the fight, now began to murmur, the energy shifting from tense anticipation to something else, something closer to respect. Mia watched, her heart still racing but her eyes sharp and focused. She had known that Max was good. But seeing Kyle go down twice in such a short time felt like vindication. This wasn't just a fight for their own pride, it was for everyone who had ever been pushed around, made to feel small. It was for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong. Kyle wiped his mouth and finally met Max's eyes, his expression hardening. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice low but filled with venom. "You think you've won? You haven't." Max didn't flinch. "We don't need to fight anymore, Kyle. You've already lost." The words hung in the air as the gym fell into an eerie silence once more. It wasn't the sound of victory they were hearing, it was the sound of the battle finally being over. For Mia and Max, it wasn't just about strength anymore. It was about proving they were more than the labels the world tried to put on them. Kyle glared at them one last time before turning and storming out of the ring, his friends trailing behind him. The gym was still, the echoes of his retreat reverberating through the empty space. For a moment it was like the world had paused, suspended in time. And then, the murmur of the crowd began again, this time with more warmth, more admiration. People were whispering, some nodding in approval, others looking at the twins in a new light. Mia and Max exchanged a glance, neither of them smiling but both understanding. The battle had been won, but the war had only just begun. The gym was a lot quieter than usual after the fight. The usual buzz of students talking, laughing, and shouting during their lunch period seemed absent. Mia and Max could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Kyle may have stormed off in defeat, but the battle wasn't over. There was a storm coming, and it wasn't just about what happened in the ring. The ripple effect of what had transpired would soon spread far beyond the gym. As they exited the ring, Max's pulse still raced. He felt a sense of relief but also tension in the pit of his stomach. Kyle wasn't the type to back down so easily, and that meant trouble. Mia, as always, was beside him, her presence grounding him. "You think he'll try again?" Mia asked quietly as they made their way to the locker room. Max didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over at his sister. He could see that she, too, had that edge of quiet determination. They both knew that Kyle's defeat was only temporary. Kyle wouldn't stay quiet for long. "He'll come back, but we'll be ready for him," Max said finally, his voice steady. "We always are." Mia nodded. She trusted Max's judgment, as she always had. But even so, she couldn't shake the feeling that Kyle's defeat might just be the beginning of something more dangerous. After all, Kyle was one of the most popular kids in school, and being knocked down in front of everyone would bruise more than just his ego. It would make him dangerous. As they entered the locker room, a few of their classmates were already there, getting changed and chatting about the fight. Some students gave them nods of approval, others exchanged quiet words, but no one approached them directly. It was as if a newfound respect was being built in the wake of the fight, though no one had the courage to speak it out loud just yet. Mia pulled off her jacket, stuffing it into her locker, her thoughts swirling. "You think they'll stop picking on us now?" she asked, half to herself. Max didn't answer right away, as he removed his gym bag and tossed it into his locker. He knew the answer, of course they wouldn't stop. But Mia had a point. The fight had certainly earned them some respect, but with people like Kyle, respect could be fleeting. The real test would come when the halls emptied out and the whispers started circulating. Everyone would be watching them now, but the question was whether they would be treated like equals, or targets. Before Max could respond, the door to the locker room slammed open, and in walked Brad and Eric. The two of them stood at the threshold for a moment, sizing up Max and Mia. Their faces were hard, but there was something else, an unease that hadn't been there before. Max's eyes narrowed, but he didn't make a move. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest and looked at them evenly. "So, what now?" Max asked, his voice measured. "You two want a round too?" Brad smirked, though it was strained. "Not exactly," he said, stepping into the room and leaning against a locker. "But Kyle's, well, he's pissed. We just came to say, don't get too comfortable." Eric stood silently next to Brad, his arms crossed, and his gaze hard. It was clear they were both still on Kyle's side, but something about the way they stood seemed different. They were no longer the cocky, overconfident guys who would have picked on Max and Mia without a second thought. The atmosphere had shifted. "You're not the only ones who have to worry about this," Brad added, his tone darker than usual. "You think you're untouchable just because you took Kyle down a notch? He's not done with you." Max was about to respond, but Mia cut in. "We didn't want any of this, Brad," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Kyle started it. And if he wants to finish it, he's going to have to deal with us." Brad and Eric exchanged a look, one that said they weren't sure how to handle this new version of Mia and Max, the version that no longer cowered, the version that would stand their ground. Brad sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Whatever. Just, don't think this is over. You'll see." With that, the two of them turned and left the locker room, their footsteps echoing as the door closed behind them. Mia and Max exchanged a look. The warning had been delivered, but it hadn't been the same as before. There was less bravado, less mockery. It was almost respectful. "Not what I expected," Mia said, breaking the silence. Max glanced at her, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Yeah, me neither. But even as they stood there, a sense of unease lingered. Kyle had been knocked down, but his pride wasn't going to allow him to stay out of the picture for long. And Brad and Eric? They weren't going to walk away from this. The twins knew that their enemies might have been temporarily subdued, but the real test was ahead. They would have to face the consequences of their actions, and it would be up to them to decide how to handle the fallout. It was the next day before anything else really happened. As the twins walked through the halls of Jefferson High, the buzz had shifted. The rumors were swirling, people were talking, whispering, and the atmosphere was heavy with speculation. Some students treated them with newfound respect, others with fear, but it was clear that things had changed. Max and Mia had been bracing for retaliation, but what they didn't expect was what happened next. After lunch, as they were walking toward their next class, a figure approached them, one they hadn't expected to see, Emma, the quiet girl from the AP English class. "Hey, Max, Mia," she said, her voice hesitant, though there was a glint of something else in her eyes. Max and Mia both stopped, surprised by her sudden appearance. Hey," Mia said cautiously, her brow furrowing. "Is everything okay?" Emma looked around quickly, making sure no one was too close. "Listen, I just wanted to say, thanks. For what you did with Kyle. I don't think you realize how many people were just waiting for someone to stand up to him. And you did." Max and Mia exchanged a surprised glance. Emma wasn't someone they'd ever spoken to much. She was quiet, kept to herself mostly, and didn't seem to be the type to get involved in things like this. "You're welcome," Max replied, still unsure of where this was going. Emma glanced down, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I know what it's like. To be picked on. To be invisible. I don't know what Kyle's planning next, but if you ever need help, I'm here. I can't promise much, but I can help." Mia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this, Emma, of all people, offering support. But somehow, it felt like a turning point. Someone else was on their side, and that made all the difference. "Thanks," Mia said quietly, giving Emma a small smile. "That means a lot." And with that, Emma nodded and walked away, leaving the twins standing there, processing the unexpected ally they had just gained. Maybe, just maybe, the tide was starting to turn in their favor. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days after Emma's unexpected support felt surreal. For the first time in a long while, Mia and Max walked the halls of Jefferson High without the constant weight of fear or tension. They had become the talk of the school. Some students admired them, others feared them, but no one dared to openly challenge them. Kyle's defeat at the hands of Max had sent a clear message: they were not to be messed with. But despite the newfound respect, or fear, surrounding them, Mia knew the calm wouldn't last. Kyle was out there, plotting his next move, and that's what made the silence feel ominous. Brad and Eric hadn't been much of a threat after the fight, but they were still loyal to Kyle. They would be his eyes and ears, and the moment Kyle figured out how to regain his pride, he would come for them. At least they weren't alone anymore. Emma's quiet support had planted a seed of hope. The idea that someone, even if they weren't part of their inner circle, believed in them made everything feel a little less impossible. If they could survive Kyle, maybe they could survive high school. It was a late Thursday afternoon when the storm finally hit. The twins were sitting outside, the usual buzz of students talking and laughing filling the air. The weather was warm, the kind of weather that made it easy to forget the pressure they had been under for weeks. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the school grounds. Max had just finished talking about their homework when he noticed someone approaching from the corner of his eye. He looked up to see Brad, walking slowly but with purpose toward them. Mia stiffened beside him, but Max remained calm. They had already dealt with Kyle. If Brad was coming to challenge them, then they would deal with him too. "Hey," Brad said, his tone different from the one he'd had before the fight. He wasn't brash or arrogant now. He looked more tired. "I know this probably isn't how you thought things would go down, but I wanted to talk." Max and Mia exchanged wary glances. This wasn't what they had expected, not after everything that had happened in the gym. Brad wasn't one for apologies, at least not the kind that involved admitting he was wrong. "What do you want, Brad?" Mia asked, her voice cautious but firm. Brad took a deep breath and looked around, making sure no one was listening. I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. I know I didn't really get it, you know. I mean, I always thought you guys were just weird. But seeing you take down Kyle like that, it kind of made me realize how much I've been a part of the problem." Max raised an eyebrow. Was this a joke? Could it be possible that Brad had actually come to apologize? Mia spoke first. "So, what? You just woke up and realized you were a bully?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "You think one apology changes everything?" Brad hesitated for a moment. "I get it. I don't expect you to forgive me just like that. But I wanted to say that I understand now. And I just wanted to let you know that I'm not going to be part of the problem anymore." Mia studied him for a moment, unsure whether she should trust this sudden change of heart. Brad had always been one of Kyle's main supporters, and while his apology seemed genuine, it was hard to forget everything that had led to this moment. Bullies didn't just change overnight. Max, sensing the tension, stood up. "I'm not buying it, Brad," he said bluntly. "You've been part of this school's toxic atmosphere for far too long. You don't get to undo that with a couple of words." Brad's face fell, and he nodded, as if he'd expected that response. "I get it. I just wanted to try. I won't push it. But I hope you can see that I'm trying to make it right." The silence between them was heavy, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of the entire school was on their shoulders. They had just come off a fight with Kyle and his lackeys, and now Brad, the very person who had once been part of their tormentors, was standing there, offering an apology. "We'll see," Mia said after a long pause, her voice firm but not unkind. "But you'll have to prove it. And it won't be easy." Brad nodded and slowly turned to leave, his footsteps dragging as he walked away. Max and Mia watched him go, neither of them feeling any sense of closure. Apologies were complicated. Sometimes, they meant something, and other times, they were just words. "I don't trust him," Max said after a moment, his voice low. "Neither do I," Mia replied, "but maybe that's something he has to prove." The rest of the afternoon passed in relative quiet. Mia and Max went to their last classes of the day, but their minds were elsewhere. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Brad's apology might have been a step in the right direction, but they couldn't afford to let their guard down. That evening, after dinner, Mia and Max sat together in their room, studying in silence. Mia was the first to break the stillness, putting down her books and turning to her brother. "Max. Do you ever feel like it's not over? That we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop?" Max looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. He knew exactly what she meant. Despite everything, despite the fight with Kyle, despite Emma's unexpected support, there was still a gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. It wasn't over. Not yet. "Yeah," he said quietly, leaning back in his chair. "I've been thinking the same thing. It's not over. Kyle might be lying low for now, but we know how he is. And Brad, he might have apologized, but I don't buy it. We can't just relax." Mia nodded, her fingers tapping the edge of her desk. "And I'm pretty sure Kyle has something planned. He won't let this slide. He's too proud. Too angry." Just then, the sound of a loud knock echoed from downstairs, and both of them froze. It was late, and their parents were already asleep. Who could be knocking at this hour? Max stood up quickly, his senses alert. "Stay here," he said, his voice low. "I'll check it out." Mia nodded, her heart beginning to race. It wasn't the kind of night for unexpected visitors. Max carefully crept down the stairs, his footsteps barely making a sound. When he reached the front door, he peered through the peephole. Standing outside, bathed in the dim light from the porch, was Kyle. Max's heart sank. He had been expecting this. Without a second thought, he opened the door, standing between Kyle and the twins' home. "What do you want, Kyle?" Max asked, his voice even but tense. Kyle didn't smile, but there was something cold in his eyes. "I think it's time we finish this." Max stood there in the doorway, his heart pounding, as he faced Kyle. The anger in Kyle's eyes was unmistakable. He hadn't come here to talk. He hadn't come to apologize. This was personal. Mia, having heard the conversation from upstairs, rushed down the stairs behind him. She didn't say a word, just stood by Max, her eyes locked on Kyle, her posture tense and ready. For a moment, the only sound was the steady rhythm of their breathing. It felt like everything had led to this moment. Kyle's eyes flickered toward Mia, but he kept his gaze mostly on Max. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said, his voice cold and sharp. "You think just because you beat me in front of everyone that you're untouchable now?" Max took a step forward, his voice unwavering. "This isn't about winning, Kyle. You made this personal. You've been targeting us for years, and we've had enough." Kyle smirked, but it wasn't a look of amusement. It was the kind of smirk that came before a storm, when someone was about to lose everything. "You think that's enough? You think standing up to me is enough to fix what's been broken? You really don't get it, do you?" "I get it," Max said, his voice hardening. "But you don't control us anymore." Mia stepped forward beside him, her jaw clenched. "You can try all you want to tear us down, Kyle, but we're not going anywhere." Kyle's lips twisted into a sneer. "You really think this is over, huh? You think because you got one punch in that this is done?" Max's pulse quickened. He knew it was coming. He had expected Kyle to lash out like this, angry, vengeful. But the difference now was that Max wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Before Max could say another word, Kyle shoved him hard in the chest. The force sent Max stumbling back a few steps, but he caught himself and immediately stepped forward again. "Enough!" Kyle barked, his fists clenched. "You'll never be left alone again. Not while I'm around. You hear me?" Mia's eyes flashed with a dangerous determination. "We've been dealing with you for years, Kyle. You'll get no satisfaction out of trying to break us." Kyle's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, Max thought he saw something different in him, a flicker of hesitation. But then it was gone, replaced by the same anger he always carried. "Go ahead," Kyle sneered. "Do your worst. But I promise you, this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Max looked at his sister, and they shared a brief, silent exchange. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on them both, the bullying, the torment, the years of being forced to live in Kyle's shadow. But in that moment, they knew they were stronger than any of the battles they had fought before. They had survived the hardest parts of their lives, and they weren't about to back down now. Max took a deep breath and stood tall. "I'm not scared of you anymore, Kyle." Mia nodded in agreement. "And we don't need to prove anything to you. You're not our enemy anymore. You're just a footnote in our story." Kyle's face twisted in fury, his hands trembling with rage. "You'll regret this. I swear it. No one crosses me and gets away with it." Without another word, he turned sharply and stormed off the front steps, slamming the door behind him. The finality of it left a silence hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. Max stood motionless for a moment, his heart racing as the adrenaline began to subside. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Kyle's threats were never idle, and Max knew it was only a matter of time before the bully came back with something more dangerous. But for the first time, Max didn't feel the overwhelming fear he used to. Mia broke the silence first, her voice steady. "Do you think he'll come after us again?" Max's expression darkened. "Absolutely. But now we know what he's capable of. We can't let our guard down." Mia's gaze softened. "We'll handle it. Together. We always do." Max nodded, his eyes narrowing with determination. "Yeah, we will." The next few days were filled with tension. The air at school felt charged, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable aftermath of the confrontation. Kyle hadn't come to school, and there were rumors circulating that he was laying low for a while, licking his wounds. But everyone knew it wasn't over. Max and Mia walked the hallways like they were walking through a battlefield, only this time, they weren't the ones on edge. They had gained something crucial in that final confrontation: control. No longer were they the targets. They were the ones calling the shots. But there was still a gnawing feeling at the back of their minds that Kyle was going to come back with a vengeance. It was during lunch that things took an unexpected turn. As Mia and Max sat down at their usual spot, a familiar face appeared: Emma. She smiled slightly as she approached them, her eyes flicking nervously over her shoulder before she sat down next to them. "Hey," Emma said, her voice low, as if she didn't want anyone else to overhear. "I think you should know something." Max and Mia exchanged a glance. "What's up?" Mia asked, her voice cautious. Emma took a deep breath and leaned in closer, her eyes scanning the room once more. "I heard Kyle talking to Brad earlier. He's planning something. I don't know exactly what, but I think he's been plotting this for a while. And he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." Max's jaw tightened. "What do you mean by that?" Emma hesitated. "I don't know the details, but I overheard them saying that Kyle's got something big planned. Maybe tomorrow. Something that's going to make you both regret what happened." Max felt his heart skip a beat. They hadn't been wrong, Kyle wasn't done. He was just biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We need to get ready," Max said, his voice low but determined. "Whatever he's planning, we'll be ready for it." Mia's eyes narrowed. "He won't get the satisfaction of breaking us." "Not again." "Not this time," Max agreed. Emma's face looked worried. "Just, be careful. I'll try to find out more, but you have to watch your backs." As Emma left, Mia and Max sat in silence, the weight of what was coming pressing down on them once again. They had been in the eye of the storm, and now the real fight was about to begin. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tension and anticipation. Every time the bell rang, signaling the end of a class or the beginning of another, Mia and Max couldn't help but feel that nagging sense of something about to happen. Kyle wasn't one to leave things unresolved for long. That night, as they sat at the kitchen table, their mother's soft voice broke the silence. "You two are awfully quiet tonight. Is something wrong?" Max and Mia exchanged a glance. They couldn't exactly tell their mom about the ongoing trouble with Kyle, not yet. They didn't want to worry her. But the truth was, their world had changed. No matter how much they tried to pretend things were normal, nothing felt normal anymore. Mia smiled faintly and shrugged. "Just tired, Mom. School's been a lot." Their mom studied them for a moment, as if she knew there was something they weren't saying, but she didn't press them further. "Well, make sure you both get some rest. Big day tomorrow." Max nodded, but as their mom turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of the worry in her eyes. He knew that she could sense something was off. It was a mother's instinct, and she was never wrong. After dinner, they retreated to their room, a quiet tension settling between them. Max sat on his bed, his phone in hand, scrolling through messages and trying to distract himself. Mia was pacing back and forth, the sharp click of her shoes on the hardwood floor echoing in the stillness. "Do you think it's really happening tomorrow?" Mia asked, her voice low and edged with unease. Max didn't look up from his phone. "If Emma's right, then yeah. It's coming. We just don't know what yet. We've been waiting for this. I mean, we knew it wouldn't end after the fight. But, what if we're not ready? What if he's got something we can't handle?" Max finally looked up, locking eyes with her. "We've handled everything so far, Mia. And we'll handle this too. We just need to stick together." Mia sighed, sitting next to him on the bed. "I just don't want you to get hurt. I can't keep watching you go through this." Max placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice firm. "And you won't have to. We'll take care of each other." The conversation was quiet after that. They both understood the stakes, but there was a certain comfort in knowing they had each other. They had faced the worst parts of their high school lives together, and whatever Kyle threw at them, they would face it together too. The night dragged on, with both of them lying awake in the dark, too restless to sleep. They could hear the soft creak of the house settling, the occasional sound of wind rattling against the windows, but mostly, there was an eerie silence, a sense of waiting. Finally, Mia broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Max, do you ever feel like we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop?" Max shifted slightly, staring up at the ceiling. "Yeah. All the time." The next morning, the school was buzzing with a strange kind of energy. Students were whispering in groups, casting furtive glances toward the twins, and many of the older students were talking about the big game that was happening after school, yet, none of it seemed to matter. The air was thick with uncertainty, and everywhere Max and Mia went, they could feel eyes on them. As they made their way to their first class, Mia nudged Max, a frown tugging at her lips. "Do you hear that? It's like everyone knows something is about to happen." Max nodded, his mind racing. He had felt it too. The school had been tense ever since the fight with Kyle, but today it was different. There was an undercurrent of something darker in the air, like a storm that hadn't yet hit, but everyone knew it was coming. They reached their lockers, and just as Max was about to open his, he saw Brad standing a few lockers down, watching them. His expression was unreadable, his posture stiff. He was waiting for them. Max turned to Mia. "Stay alert." Brad walked over slowly, stopping just in front of them. His eyes were downcast, as if he was having trouble meeting their gaze. "I know you're probably not ready to talk to me yet," Brad started, his voice quieter than usual. "But there's something you need to know." Max crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "What is it, Brad?" "I overheard something yesterday," Brad said, his voice hesitant. "I didn't want to say anything, but Kyle's planning something big. He's got the whole thing set up for after school." Mia's eyes widened. "What do you mean? What's he planning?" Brad swallowed hard. "I don't know all the details. But he's planning on humiliating you both in front of the entire school. He's been talking to the student body, getting them to back him up. Whatever it is, it's going to hurt." Max's jaw tightened. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and he didn't like what he was hearing. Kyle wasn't going to back down. He was going to escalate this, turn the entire school against them if he had to. Mia stepped forward, her voice steady. "Brad, why are you telling us this?" Brad looked over his shoulder, then back at them. "Because I don't want to be part of this anymore. I can't stand by and watch Kyle do this to you. If I can help, I will." Max and Mia exchanged glances. It wasn't easy to trust Brad, not after everything that had happened. But something about the way he was acting made it hard to ignore his sincerity. Maybe he really was trying to change. "All right," Max said slowly, "we appreciate the warning. But whatever he's planning, we're going to handle it." Brad nodded. "Just be careful. Don't say I didn't warn you." He turned and walked away, leaving Max and Mia standing in stunned silence. They didn't know if they could trust him, but they didn't have much choice. The storm was coming, and they needed to be ready. The final bell rang, signaling the end of another school day, but for Max and Mia, this wasn't just another ordinary dismissal. The tension was palpable as they walked out of the classroom, surrounded by groups of students who were all heading toward the football field. It was happening. Max could feel his heartbeat in his chest as he walked beside Mia, scanning the crowd. There was a sense of unease in the air, a quiet energy that made everything feel like it was on the verge of exploding. "What do you think Kyle has planned?" Mia asked, her voice tight with worry. "I don't know, but I have a feeling it's going to be big," Max replied, his eyes scanning the crowd. They made their way toward the field, the atmosphere growing thicker with every step. Students were already gathering in clusters, whispering and laughing, but it wasn't the usual kind of excitement. This felt different, like something dangerous was about to happen. And then, they saw him. Kyle stood in the center of the field, surrounded by a group of his loyal followers, including Brad, who was standing just off to the side, looking nervous. Kyle raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. Max and Mia exchanged a glance. This was it. The moment they had been dreading. Kyle's voice rang out across the field. "Everyone's been talking about the so-called black belt champions. Well, let's see how well you two can handle a real fight." The crowd erupted in a mixture of murmurs and laughter, but Max and Mia didn't flinch. They were ready. Max and Mia stood there, the buzz of the crowd filling the air, but all they could hear was Kyle's voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Kyle's words hung in the air as if the entire school was waiting for something to explode. Well, if it isn't the heroes of the school. The famous black belt champions, huh? Let's see just how tough you really are. His eyes were cold, glinting with a mix of fury and something darker, resentment, maybe. Max could feel his blood start to boil. He had been expecting this. Kyle didn't know how to back down, didn't know how to lose with grace. But there was something about seeing him stand there, making threats in front of everyone, that made Max's stomach twist with frustration. "Don't let him get to you," Mia murmured, stepping closer to him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "We've been through worse. This is just his last attempt to prove he can break us." Max nodded, but his gaze never left Kyle. He could see the crowd gathering behind him, murmuring among themselves. Kyle had a show ready, and Max knew it was going to be anything but pretty. Mia turned to him, her eyes burning with a quiet fire. "Let's finish this, together." And just like that, Max felt a sense of calm wash over him. It wasn't about proving themselves to the school anymore. It wasn't even about Kyle. It was about their journey, their fight for respect, for each other, and for everything they had worked for. They were more than ready for whatever came next. The field was nearly silent now, save for the occasional rustling of feet shuffling in the dirt. Kyle stepped forward, and with a crooked grin, he gestured toward the center of the field. "Let's make it interesting, shall we?" Max's eyes narrowed. This was no longer just a simple confrontation. Kyle wanted something more. He wanted humiliation. He wanted to make an example out of them. Mia whispered, "Don't fall for it. Keep your cool." Max clenched his fists. He wasn't going to fall for it. They had worked too hard to let someone like Kyle define their worth. "Let's have a real fight," Kyle said, his voice louder, filled with malicious glee. "You two are always talking about martial arts and discipline. Let's see how disciplined you really are when it's just you against me." Max could see the game Kyle was playing. He wanted them to lose their cool, to lose their heads. If they fought back with anger, it would just prove his point. He was trying to manipulate them, and that made Max angrier than anything. But there was one thing Kyle hadn't counted on: Max and Mia had learned how to fight with purpose, with focus. They didn't fight for glory or to make someone else feel small. They fought for themselves, for each other, and for the journey they had been on. Max met Kyle's gaze, his voice steady, but filled with unshakable determination. "We don't need to prove anything to you, Kyle. This is over. You've already lost." The crowd was hushed now, every eye on the two of them. For a moment, it almost felt like the world had slowed down. Even Kyle's followers were quiet, unsure of how to react. Max could tell that they were waiting for Kyle to make his move. And when he did, they would be ready. Kyle's face twisted into an angry scowl. He took one step forward, then another, his fists clenched. "This is far from over, Max. You think just because you landed one punch in front of everyone that it means you've won? I'm not done with you, not by a long shot." Max didn't flinch. "If you think you're intimidating me right now, you're wrong. We've been through worse, and we're still standing. But you'll always be a bully." A sharp silence filled the air. The weight of Max's words hung over Kyle, and for the first time, Kyle faltered. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that. He was used to making people cower, making them beg for his forgiveness. But Max and Mia didn't fear him. They were standing up to him, no, they were standing against him. Without warning, Kyle lunged forward, his fist swinging toward Max. The crowd gasped, but Max was already moving. His body was a blur, his training kicking in as he sidestepped the attack and grabbed Kyle's arm, twisting it with precise movements. The move was quick, practiced, Max didn't have to think about it. He had spent years learning how to control situations like this. Kyle let out a grunt of pain, but instead of backing down, he tried to shake Max off. He twisted his body, slamming an elbow into Max's side. Max staggered for a moment, but Mia was there, like a shadow, she swept her leg under Kyle's, knocking him off balance. He fell hard onto the grass, his face contorted in frustration. The crowd murmured, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Kyle pushed himself up, spitting dirt from his mouth, glaring at the twins. His anger was palpable, but now there was something else too, fear. Fear that he might lose control, that he might not be able to manipulate this situation the way he had planned. "You're outmatched, Kyle," Max said, standing tall. "You've spent so much time trying to break us that you've forgotten something. We're not afraid anymore. Not of you, not of anyone." Mia stepped forward, standing beside Max, her gaze unwavering. "This is where it ends. Not with a fight, not with humiliation. But with you realizing you've lost. You're not in control anymore." The crowd was dead silent. No one had expected this. It wasn't just the fact that Max and Mia had successfully defended themselves, it was the confidence they exuded, the certainty that Kyle no longer had any power over them. Kyle's face turned red with anger, but there was no more bravado. He had underestimated them, and it was clear now. The game was over, and Kyle had lost. "You think you've won?" Kyle sneered, though his voice wavered. "This isn't over. You'll never be safe from me." Max shook his head. "We've been through the worst, Kyle. And we're still standing. You'll never break us." With that, Kyle finally turned and stormed off the field, his followers hesitating for a moment before following him. The crowd remained motionless, unsure of what they had just witnessed, but one thing was clear, the power had shifted. The bully who had tormented them for so long was no longer the one in control. Max and Mia stood there, their bodies still tense, but there was a sense of calm washing over them. The crowd slowly began to disperse, some still talking in hushed voices, others glancing back at the twins in awe. Max and Mia shared a silent look, and in that moment, they knew something had changed, not just between them and Kyle, but within themselves. They had faced their fears head-on, stood their ground, and come out on top. The battle had been difficult, but it had proven something vital: no one, not even the most dangerous of bullies, could take away their strength. As the last few students left the field, Mia turned to Max. "We did it," she said softly, her voice full of relief and pride. Max smiled, his heart still pounding from the adrenaline. Yeah, we did. Together. And for the first time in a long time, they both felt truly free. The crowd that had gathered around the football field slowly dispersed, leaving behind an eerie quiet that seemed to stretch across the school. Max and Mia stood together in the center of the field, their bodies still humming with adrenaline, but their minds racing as they processed what had just happened. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The intensity of the confrontation with Kyle still lingered in the air like a heavy fog. But despite the tension that had been building for weeks, they could finally breathe again. Kyle had been defeated, not physically, but mentally. And that, in the end, was what had truly mattered. Mia looked at her brother, her face softening. I didn't think it would feel this final, she said, her voice low. Max nodded, his gaze still lingering on the spot where Kyle had stood just moments before. Yeah. Me neither. But it's over now. They stood in silence for a while, watching the last few students trickle away, no one daring to speak too loudly. Word was already spreading, and Max could feel the weight of their victory settling in. No one would ever see them the same way again. As they made their way toward the edge of the field, where their backpacks were waiting, Mia spoke up again. Do you think Kyle's going to come back at us? Or is he really done? Max shrugged, trying to play it cool, though he knew the question was on both of their minds. Honestly? I don't know. Kyle's unpredictable. He's got a lot of pride, and that's not something you lose easily. But I don't think he'll be messing with us for a while. We've made our point. Mia didn't respond, but the way she tilted her head and pursed her lips told Max she wasn't entirely convinced. She was right to be cautious. There were still a lot of unknowns in the situation, and while this battle may have been won, the war was far from over. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Max continued, his voice steady. We'll keep our guard up. We've still got a long way to go. They gathered their things and headed toward the parking lot, where their mom was waiting to pick them up. As they walked, Max couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Relief. Pride. And underneath it all, a sense of uncertainty. Had they truly finished with Kyle? Or was there more to come? The ride home was quiet, save for the soft hum of the car's engine and the occasional turn of the radio dial. Their mother had picked them up from school, and now, they were on their way back to the safety of their home. It should have felt like a victory lap, but the unease from the confrontation still lingered, weighing heavily on their shoulders. Are you two okay? Their mom's voice broke the silence, warm and comforting. Max and Mia exchanged glances. How could they explain the weight of what had just happened? The fight with Kyle wasn't just a fight, it had been a test of everything they'd learned, everything they'd been through. Mia was the first to respond, her voice quiet but steady. Yeah, Mom. We're okay. It's just, a lot to take in. Their mom looked over her shoulder briefly, glancing at the two of them with a worried expression. I know this has been hard on both of you. But I'm proud of you. I always have been. Max nodded, his throat tight. Thanks, Mom. The words were simple, but they meant more than anything. They were both exhausted, mentally and physically, but knowing that their mom had their backs, that made everything worth it. As they pulled into the driveway, Max's mind drifted back to the fight. He couldn't stop replaying it in his head, the way Kyle had tried to provoke them, the way they had stood their ground. But as much as he was proud of their victory, he couldn't shake the nagging thought that it wasn't over. Not yet. The following morning, Max and Mia walked into school with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. The events of the previous day were still fresh in their minds, but as they stepped through the gates of the school, they could feel something different. It was as though the atmosphere had shifted. There was an energy in the air, an unspoken recognition of what had happened. Students were whispering, glancing at them with curiosity. But there was no hostility, no mocking looks. There was respect. It was a subtle shift, but it was there. Max could feel it, and Mia could see it in the way people were reacting to them. As they made their way to their lockers, they ran into Emma, who was already waiting for them with a wide grin. "Well, well, look at you two. You really showed him, huh?" Max couldn't help but smile, his chest swelling with pride. "Yeah, it felt pretty good. But I'm not sure it's over yet." Emma raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Max glanced around, lowering his voice. "I don't know. Something about Kyle. I don't think he's going to stay down for long. But for now, it feels like we've won the first round." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I get it. But you guys did something big yesterday. People are talking about it. Everyone's watching now. And Kyle, he'll think twice before going after you again." Mia crossed her arms, looking down the hall with a distant expression. "I hope so. But Kyle's the kind of guy who doesn't let things go easily. We need to stay on our toes." As the day went on, Max and Mia noticed the subtle changes. Students no longer whispered behind their backs, and there were no more snide comments from the usual bullies. In fact, some of the upperclassmen actually nodded at them in passing. It was like the entire school had given them a new kind of respect, one they hadn't had before. For the first time, Max and Mia felt like they truly belonged in the school, not as outsiders or targets, but as equals. They had earned their place, not just with their martial arts skills, but with their courage, their strength, and their ability to stand up for themselves. But there was still a lingering uncertainty. They had defeated Kyle, but what if someone else stepped up to challenge them? What if the people who had supported Kyle came after them instead? Max didn't know the answers, but as he looked over at Mia, he knew one thing for sure: whatever came next, they would face it together. The next few days passed in a strange, almost surreal calm. For the first time in a long while, Max and Mia found themselves walking through the school halls without the weight of constant fear and tension hanging over them. They were no longer the targets of Kyle's taunts or threats, at least, not directly. As they sat together in their first class of the day, an unusual sense of peace settled over them. They exchanged quiet glances across the table, both trying to process the changes that had come so suddenly. They weren't used to this kind of normalcy, this feeling of having space to breathe. But as the bell rang and the day began, Max couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. It was too quiet. Too easy. The brief moments of triumph were fleeting. He could feel it in the air. Something was coming. Max was walking through the cafeteria line later that afternoon when a sudden shift in the energy of the room caught his attention. The chatter that filled the room seemed to quiet for just a moment as a new figure emerged at the entrance, someone who Max and Mia had never seen before. A tall, muscular guy with piercing eyes and a confident swagger. He was definitely older than Max and Mia, probably a junior or senior. His presence was immediately felt as students turned to watch him. It wasn't just his size, it was the way he carried himself. Like he had walked straight out of a movie, all confidence and arrogance. Max exchanged a glance with Mia. She seemed to sense it too. This guy wasn't just another random student. There was something about him, something familiar. Mia leaned in and whispered, "Who is that?" Max didn't know the answer. But the more he watched the guy's movements, the more a sense of unease crept up his spine. He'd seen that look before. That look of someone who had come into a school with a mission, someone who wanted to shake things up. The new guy strode confidently toward Kyle's old table, where a small group of students were seated, all eyeing him with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. As soon as he sat down, the buzz in the room picked up again, but this time, it was laced with an underlying tension. Max couldn't help but feel like the storm was just beginning. The bell rang for the end of lunch, but as Max and Mia made their way to their next class, they found themselves being approached by none other than the new guy. He walked up to them with a slight grin, his eyes glinting with challenge. "You two are the twins, right? The ones who took down Kyle?" His voice was deep and smooth, carrying a weight that made the hairs on Max's neck stand up. Max studied him carefully. Yeah, that's us. What's it to you? The guy chuckled, taking a step closer. Well, word is, you're the new power couple in town. Everyone's talking about how you showed Kyle who's boss. But I'm not sure that means much. You see, there's one thing that gets lost in all of that martial arts stuff: strength. Real strength. Mia narrowed her eyes, sensing where this conversation was headed. And what exactly are you trying to say? The guy's grin grew wider, almost predatory. I'm saying you've got guts, but that's about it. You might have beaten Kyle, but you won't be able to do the same to me. My name's Lucas. I'm a black belt too. And I've been watching you. Max's stomach tightened at the mention of the word black belt. It wasn't the first time someone had used their martial arts skills to make a point, but something about Lucas was different. He wasn't trying to break them physically. He was trying to break them mentally. Lucas' eyes locked onto Max's. What do you say? You want to test out who the real champion is? Max didn't even hesitate. He was tired of people trying to challenge them. Tired of proving themselves over and over again. But something told him that Lucas wasn't just another bully. He was dangerous. He was calculated. And this wasn't going to be a fight they could win by simply showing their skills. I don't need to prove anything to you, Max said, his voice firm. We've had our fair share of fights, and we're done with that. But if you want to keep pushing, we're ready. Mia crossed her arms, her eyes sharp and unyielding. It's not about winning or losing. It's about knowing when to walk away. But if you insist on taking this further, we'll be waiting. Lucas' smile faltered for just a second. There was something in their resolve, something in the way they stood their ground, that made him pause. But only for a moment. Fine, he said with a shrug, as if the decision didn't matter. I'm just saying, you won't be able to hide behind your black belts forever. Sooner or later, you'll face me. And with that, he walked away, leaving Max and Mia standing there, the weight of his challenge hanging in the air. Later that evening, as Max and Mia sat at the kitchen table, their mom noticed the tension in the air. The quiet that had settled over them since the fight with Kyle had quickly evaporated, replaced by a familiar sense of unease. You guys seem quiet tonight. What's going on? Their mom asked, her voice warm but concerned. Max glanced at Mia before responding, his voice tinged with frustration. There's a new guy at school. Lucas. He's challenging us. He's a black belt, and he thinks he can beat us. Mia let out a sigh, looking at their mom. It feels like the whole school is just waiting for the next fight. We've been through this before, but it's different this time. Lucas doesn't seem like someone who'll back down. Their mom's face softened with understanding. She had seen the toll that the bullying and fighting had taken on her kids. She had hoped the worst was over. But this felt different. This felt like something more. You two have always been strong. But remember, it's not about proving something to anyone else. It's about what you believe in. You don't have to fight every battle. Max met his mom's gaze. I know. But if we walk away from this, it'll look like we're afraid. And that's not who we are. Mia nodded, her face set in determination. We can't back down now. But we also can't get caught up in the games. We'll handle this, like we always do. Their mom smiled at them, a mixture of pride and concern in her eyes. Just be careful. I don't want to see either of you get hurt. Max and Mia exchanged a glance. It wasn't just about handling Lucas anymore. It was about standing strong for everything they had worked for. Their lives, their family, and each other. The days that followed Lucas's challenge were filled with an uneasy tension. Max and Mia could feel the eyes of their classmates constantly on them, waiting for the next confrontation. They couldn't deny it, the battle wasn't over. But neither of them could afford to let it consume them. They had learned from their experience with Kyle. Physical strength wasn't the only way to win, mental resilience was just as important. They had to be patient. But that didn't make it any easier. The school halls felt different now. Everywhere they went, there were whispers and sideways glances. It wasn't just Lucas's challenge that lingered in the air, it was the weight of expectations that had shifted. Max could sense it as he walked down the hall, the collective gaze of his peers following him like a shadow. He wasn't just a student anymore. He was a symbol. Mia, on the other hand, appeared to take it all in stride. She walked with a quiet confidence, her head held high as she navigated the hallways with ease. But even she could feel the pressure mounting. In the cafeteria that day, a few students who had once ignored them now approached with an almost reverent air. "You guys really gave it to Kyle, huh?" one of them asked, his voice a mix of awe and curiosity. Max, feeling the pressure, shrugged nonchalantly. "Just stood up for ourselves. No big deal." But Mia saw through his cool exterior. She could tell he was struggling with the weight of everyone's eyes on him. She reached out and touched his arm lightly. "We don't have to prove anything to them," she whispered, her voice calm. "We've already shown who we are." Max smiled faintly but didn't respond. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the facade of indifference. Lucas's words haunted him. The challenge had been issued, but the waiting game was beginning to feel like a slow burn. The days bled into one another, each one more exhausting than the last. Lucas didn't make any further moves, but his presence loomed large in their minds. Max and Mia both knew that the confrontation was inevitable. It wasn't about if it would happen, but when. As the weekend approached, Mia found herself struggling to sleep. Thoughts of Lucas, the challenge, and what it would mean for them filled her mind. She kept thinking back to the way Lucas had looked at them, how confident he had been, how he seemed to enjoy testing their resolve. He wasn't just playing a game. He was pushing them, seeing how far they were willing to go. Max had been quieter than usual, too. He would disappear into his room after school, lost in his thoughts. Mia tried to talk to him about it, but each time, he brushed her off. She knew better than to push him too hard, but it didn't make it any easier to watch him carry this burden alone. One evening, as the two siblings sat at the kitchen table, their mom caught sight of their distant expressions. She had been waiting for this moment. The calm before the storm was starting to crack, and she knew it. "Max, Mia," their mom began, her voice gentle yet firm, "you've both been through a lot recently. But I need you to remember something important. Standing your ground is not about the fight itself. It's about knowing when to pick your battles and when to walk away." Mia glanced at Max, then back at their mom. "We don't have to prove ourselves, right? We've already shown we're strong. But Lucas, he's not going to stop. He's going to keep pushing until we're forced to confront him. He won't let it go." Their mom nodded, her expression softening. "I know. And that's why I want you both to remember what's most important, your peace of mind. Don't let anyone else decide who you are, or what you stand for. You're stronger than that." Max's eyes were distant as he looked down at the table. "I know. But it's hard, Mom. It's like, no one will let us just move on. Everyone keeps watching. It's exhausting." Mia put a hand on his shoulder, offering what little comfort she could. "We'll figure it out. Together." Their mom smiled, though there was a trace of worry in her eyes. "I know you will. But just remember, no one can take away your peace unless you let them." That night, as Max and Mia lay in bed, the weight of everything seemed to come crashing down all at once. The pressure of being watched, the anticipation of the fight that would come, and the fear that they might lose everything they'd fought for in the blink of an eye. Max stared up at the ceiling, his mind whirring. Lucas wasn't just a challenge. He was a test, a reminder that no matter how much they achieved, there would always be someone or something waiting to tear them down. He couldn't keep running. He couldn't keep hiding behind this sense of calm. I can't let this go on any longer, Max said quietly, his voice barely audible in the dark room. Mia turned to face him. What do you mean? Max took a deep breath, his decision finally made. We need to end it. We need to face him. If we don't, this will keep hanging over us forever. Mia was silent for a moment, contemplating his words. She understood. The fight wasn't just about defending their honor anymore. It was about reclaiming their peace. They had spent too long under the weight of other people's expectations. I agree, she said at last. We'll do it on our terms. Not his. Max nodded. Tomorrow, after school. It's the only way we'll get any peace. The following day, Max and Mia arrived at school with a sense of purpose they hadn't felt in a long time. They had made their decision. It was time to end this, on their terms. They didn't know how it would play out, but one thing was clear, Lucas was about to learn what it meant to mess with the wrong people. As the day passed, the anticipation grew. Every conversation, every glance seemed to be tinged with the same question, would it happen today? And when the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Max and Mia knew it was time. They made their way to the area behind the gymnasium, where Lucas had suggested they meet. The air felt heavy with expectation, but this time, they didn't feel fear. They felt ready. Max and Mia stood side by side behind the gymnasium, their backs straight, eyes focused. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. They could hear the distant sound of students leaving for the day, their voices a soft murmur in the background. But here, it was just the two of them and the weight of what was about to happen. The moment they had both been waiting for. Lucas had promised he'd be here, and neither Max nor Mia had any doubts about his resolve. They had both prepared for this mentally, knowing that there was no turning back now. They could only move forward. So, this is it, Max muttered to Mia, his voice steady but with an edge of determination. Mia nodded, her eyes scanning the area. We've got this. We've been through worse. They waited in silence, their minds sharp, their bodies prepared for whatever Lucas was going to throw at them. And then, after what felt like an eternity, they heard footsteps approaching. Slow. Measured. Confident. Lucas appeared, stepping into the clearing with that same swagger. His eyes were locked on Max and Mia, a smirk playing on his lips. He wasn't alone, though. Two of his friends, guys who looked just as intimidating as him, stood a few paces behind, arms crossed and watching the scene unfold with cold detachment. Lucas didn't make a move at first. He just studied them, his gaze moving from one twin to the other, sizing them up. It was clear he wasn't just here to test their physical strength, he was testing their resolve. So, Lucas began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who believed victory was already in his grasp. I'm glad you two decided to show up. I wasn't sure if you'd back out. But here you are. His tone was dripping with condescension. Max clenched his fists. He wasn't going to let Lucas get under his skin. Not now. We're here, Max said, his voice sharp. And we're not backing down. Lucas chuckled, as if he'd just heard a joke. Oh, I know you won't. But here's the thing, you see. I don't play fair. His eyes glinted. This isn't about proving who's stronger. It's about showing that I'm the one who's in control. With that, Lucas took a step forward, cracking his knuckles. The air around them seemed to hum with the promise of the coming fight. Max and Mia exchanged a quick glance, each of them silently acknowledging that they were about to face one of their biggest challenges yet. Without another word, Lucas lunged toward Max, his fist swinging in a wide arc. It was fast, but Max was faster. He stepped back just in time, the punch missing by mere inches. The speed and force behind it were impressive, but Max had trained for moments like this. As Lucas continued his attack, Max's instincts kicked in. He ducked and dodged, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lucas's moves were powerful, but they were predictable. That was the difference between raw strength and technique. Max caught a glimpse of Mia from the corner of his eye. She was ready, calm, prepared. He knew she was waiting for her opening. She wasn't just there to back him up, she was his partner in this fight. They weren't alone. Lucas swung again, this time aiming for Max's head. Max blocked the punch, his forearm deflecting the blow, but the force of it still sent a jolt of pain through his arm. He gritted his teeth, refusing to let it slow him down. Max retaliated with a quick jab to Lucas's midsection, catching him off guard. The impact wasn't enough to knock him off balance, but it forced Lucas to stumble back for a brief moment, giving Max a chance to regain his footing. Just as Lucas recovered and tried to land another punch, Mia stepped in. With the grace of a trained fighter, she kicked Lucas's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. Her movements were fluid and precise, and for a moment, Lucas looked surprised, caught off guard by the strength and agility she displayed. "Did you really think we were going to back down?" Mia asked, her voice steady as she stood over him. Lucas glared at her, his eyes burning with frustration. He quickly scrambled to his feet, wiping the dirt from his clothes as if the loss of his footing had been nothing more than an inconvenience. But Max could see the change in Lucas now. The cocky arrogance had shifted into something darker. Something personal. "You're good," Lucas said, a growl in his voice. "But I'm not done yet." With a vicious roar, Lucas lunged again, but this time, his movements were wild, driven by anger rather than precision. His attacks were fast, but they were sloppy. Max could see the cracks in his technique. And in that moment, Max knew it was over. He sidestepped Lucas's next punch and quickly executed a flawless counterattack, a kick to Lucas's side that sent him staggering back, gasping for air. But it wasn't just the force of the kick that rattled Lucas. It was the realization that Max and Mia were not the same people they had been when Kyle had picked on them. They had grown. They had learned. Mia stepped forward now, her eyes locked on Lucas. "You don't get to bully us anymore," she said, her voice cold and unyielding. Lucas's breath came in short, labored gasps as he wiped sweat from his forehead, his confidence wavering. His body was bruised and battered from the quick, decisive strikes Max and Mia had landed. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected them to be this strong. Max took a step back, breathing heavily but steady. He looked at Lucas with a mix of pity and resolve. "This doesn't have to go any further. You've already lost." For a moment, there was silence between them. Lucas was still catching his breath, and Max and Mia stood there, calm, patient, and resolute. But Lucas wasn't ready to admit defeat, not yet. "I'm not done," he spat, his voice raw with frustration. "You may have won today, but you haven't seen the last of me. I'll be back." Max and Mia exchanged a glance. It wasn't fear that passed between them, it was the knowledge that they had just proven something bigger than themselves. "We'll be ready," Max said, his voice unwavering. As Lucas and his friends retreated, nursing their bruises and egos, Max and Mia remained standing in the same spot. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. They had done it. They had faced Lucas, and they had won. Max exhaled deeply, his muscles sore from the fight. He looked over at Mia, a small smile tugging at his lips. "That was something." Mia nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "Yeah. But it's not over yet." Max raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Mia's smile softened. "We've shown them we're not weak. But there's always going to be someone else. We just have to be ready." Max didn't disagree. The fight with Lucas had proven one thing: no matter how much they won, there would always be another challenge, another test. But they had proven to themselves, and to everyone else, that they were ready for whatever came next. The days after the fight felt different, almost like a new chapter had begun. Max and Mia had faced Lucas and come out on top, but what they hadn't anticipated was the ripple effect it would have on their lives. At school, the whispers were still there, but they had changed. Instead of snide comments and looks of judgment, people were starting to talk about them with a kind of respect. Max and Mia were no longer the twins who had been bullied. They were the champions, the ones who had taken a stand. But it wasn't all positive attention. Some students, particularly those who had aligned with Lucas, were still resentful. They were the ones who thought the fight wasn't fair, that Max and Mia hadn't played by the rules. It was a strange thing to be caught between admiration and disdain, but they'd both come to understand that in order to rise above the noise, they would have to continue being true to themselves. In the days following the confrontation, Max and Mia had been trying to regain their sense of normalcy. They returned to their routine, school, training, and spending time with family. But the calm wasn't lasting. Max found it harder to concentrate in class. His mind kept wandering back to the fight, to the way Lucas had looked at them with growing frustration, as if he couldn't understand how two people who had once been considered weak could suddenly take him down. He couldn't help but feel like Lucas was going to try something again, that he wasn't done yet. Mia, on the other hand, appeared to be managing the newfound attention with ease. But even she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She could feel the tension building in the air, an undercurrent of unresolved issues that no one had quite dealt with yet. One afternoon, as they walked home from school, Max voiced his concerns. "Do you think Lucas will really let this go?" he asked, looking at Mia as they cut through the park. Mia took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "I don't know. But I'm not going to wait around for him to make the first move again. We've already shown we're stronger than he thought, and I think it's time we let the rest of the school know that we're not here to be pushed around." Max nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't want to spend another moment looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next attack. It was time to stand tall, to remind everyone, including themselves, that they were in control of their own narrative. Later that week, Max and Mia found themselves sitting in the student lounge, a rare moment of calm. They were talking about their plans for the upcoming weekend, whether they'd go to their favorite spot by the lake or stay in and relax. But the conversation was abruptly interrupted by a familiar voice. "Hey, twins. Got a minute?" It was Kyle. Max and Mia had been expecting a confrontation from him for weeks. After all, Kyle had been one of the loudest voices in the crowd that day Lucas had challenged them. But when he approached them now, it was with a different tone. Gone was the cocky attitude. Now, there was something else in his eyes, a sort of curiosity, maybe even respect. Sure," Max said, not entirely sure what to expect. Kyle sat down across from them, his posture a little more relaxed than it had been before. "I just wanted to say, that was a hell of a fight you put up with Lucas." Mia raised an eyebrow. "Thanks, I guess." Kyle's lips curled into a half-smile. "I thought you two were just a bunch of pushovers, you know. But you handled it. And I gotta admit, I was wrong about you." Max and Mia exchanged a glance. Kyle had been one of Lucas's closest friends. They'd both expected some form of retaliation or insults, not this unexpected acknowledgement. "You were wrong about a lot of things," Mia said, her tone firm but not unkind. Kyle nodded. "Yeah, I guess I was. But you earned my respect. I get it now, you're not just some easy target." Max shrugged. "We've always been capable. You just never bothered to look past the surface." Kyle nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. I've seen you two in a different light now, and honestly, I'm kind of hoping we can move past the whole rivalry thing. I get that I was a part of it, but I don't want to be the kind of guy who just keeps making things worse." Mia's eyes softened slightly, though she still maintained a guarded stance. "We don't need anyone's approval, Kyle. But we're not out to make enemies, either. Just don't expect us to forget." Kyle looked genuinely apologetic. "I get it. I don't expect anything. I just want to be better." Max and Mia didn't know how to respond. This was an unexpected turn. But sometimes, that's how change happened, slowly, quietly, and when you least expected it. The next few days were a blur of new dynamics. There was a strange tension in the air, one that felt like it was both behind and ahead of them. They had faced the immediate threat from Lucas, but the lingering effects of that challenge remained. Max felt a weight in his chest every time he walked through the halls now. He wasn't sure if it was the responsibility of living up to their newfound reputation or if it was the constant anticipation of the next challenge. But there was no denying that life had shifted. They weren't the same people they had been before the fight. Mia, on the other hand, felt something different, something freeing. She realized that while they might be walking a path full of expectations, they didn't have to meet anyone's. They didn't owe anyone anything. One afternoon, after another training session at the dojo, they found themselves sitting together, looking out over the city from the roof of their building. It was one of the rare moments of stillness in their chaotic lives. "You ever wonder what would happen if we just stopped fighting?" Max asked, his voice low. "What if we just let it all go and stayed out of the way?" Mia thought for a moment, her eyes far away. "I think we'd just be invisible. We've already made our mark, Max. The world's going to remember us, whether we like it or not. But I think we're ready to face whatever comes next. Together." Max nodded. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace settle over him. They had been through the fire, and though they weren't untouched, they had come out stronger for it. Whatever the future held, they would be ready. Max and Mia's world had changed, but as they soon realized, not everyone had adjusted to the shift in dynamics. After their victory over Lucas, the school atmosphere was heavier with a sense of unease. While some students now looked up to them, others, especially those who had been part of the bullying crowd, were still not ready to let go of their preconceived notions. Max and Mia knew that while the fight with Lucas had been a turning point, it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new kind of struggle. They had made a statement, but they weren't sure who was watching or waiting for their next move. One Monday morning, as they made their way to class, Max and Mia found themselves confronted by someone they hadn't expected, Jason Carter. Jason had never been particularly close to them, and as one of Lucas's more neutral friends, he was someone they didn't think would care much about their victory. Yet here he was, leaning against a locker, waiting for them. "Hey," Jason greeted them, his usual laid-back attitude a little more serious than normal. "Got a second?" Max shot Mia a look, and she nodded. "Sure. What's up?" Jason glanced around, ensuring no one was listening. "I wanted to talk to you both about something. I know I wasn't the biggest fan of what went down with Lucas, but after thinking about it, I think you guys might be onto something. I mean, I've seen how people have been looking at you lately, and you've earned some respect." Max raised an eyebrow. "What are you getting at, Jason?" Jason took a breath. "Look, I know this is gonna sound weird coming from me, but I've been thinking a lot about how this school works. And, well, it's a mess. A lot of people are just trying to survive, you know. They look at you too, and you've got that, I can stand up for myself vibe, and I think you could help a lot of people." Mia crossed her arms, skeptical. "Help people how? By beating up more kids like Lucas?" Jason shook his head quickly. No, nothing like that. But the thing is, this school doesn't really have any real leadership. Everyone's either too scared or too focused on staying out of trouble. But you guys, you've shown that you're not just victims of bullying, you're not even just survivors. You're fighters. And people respect that." Max felt a small spark of understanding. "So what are you suggesting?" Jason hesitated, clearly trying to word his thoughts carefully. "What if we started something? A kind of group, you know. Something where people who don't have a voice can come together and not feel like they're alone. Maybe even help stop some of the bullying, if we can. We could be the ones who take control of things here, not just hide from them." Mia and Max exchanged a look. It was tempting. They had fought so hard to defend themselves, but the idea of taking things further, of creating real change, of being leaders, was something neither of them had considered before. "You're talking about a movement, aren't you?" Max asked, his voice low. "Exactly," Jason replied. "Not just for us, but for everyone who's been overlooked. For everyone who's afraid to stand up, who's tired of living in fear. We can be their voice." Mia was quiet for a moment, her eyes scanning Jason's face, reading the sincerity in his words. "And you really think people will follow us? After everything?" Jason nodded. "People already are, whether they admit it or not. We just need to give them something to believe in." Max looked at Mia, then back at Jason. "I think we're in." Jason grinned. "Good. We'll need all the help we can get." The following week, Jason helped arrange the first unofficial meeting of what they were now calling the Resistance. It was a small group, at first, mostly students who had been victims of bullying or outcasts in one way or another. They gathered in a quiet corner of the library, an unlikely spot for what they were about to undertake. Max and Mia stood at the front, looking around at the faces of their new allies. There was Ellie, a shy girl who had been relentlessly picked on for her appearance, Marcus, a quiet kid who had been targeted because of his academic success, and even some of the former athletes who had always stayed on the sidelines, too scared to speak up. Max cleared his throat, standing tall in front of them all. "We're here because we've all experienced something that's been wrong, whether it's bullying, exclusion, or being ignored. We're tired of living in fear. We're tired of letting people think they can control us. We're here to fight back, but not just with our fists. We're here to stand up for each other, and to show everyone that we don't have to be afraid anymore." Mia stepped forward, her voice calm but strong. "This isn't about revenge. It's about making sure no one feels like they're alone anymore. We're stronger when we come together. And if we do this right, we can change things. We can show this school that kindness and respect are stronger than cruelty and fear." There was a moment of silence in the room as the words sank in. Then, one by one, the students began to nod, some even clapping lightly in agreement. Over the next few weeks, the resistance began to grow. The word spread quietly at first, a whisper here and there, until it gained enough momentum to be seen as more than just an idea. Max and Mia worked tirelessly with Jason and the others, using their own experiences to reach out to students who had been silent, those who felt powerless. The group didn't just focus on confronting the bullies. They also worked on building positive relationships with teachers and staff, trying to foster a sense of community. They weren't just fighting against something, they were fighting for something: equality, understanding, and the right to exist without fear. But of course, not everyone was thrilled with the rise of this new force. The bullies, led by Lucas and his remaining supporters, began to push back. They didn't like the idea of anyone challenging their power. They started to target members of the resistance with even more intensity, hoping to scare them into submission. But Max, Mia, and the rest of their new group were determined. They weren't backing down now. The more the bullies pushed, the stronger they grew. One afternoon, just before the final bell rang, Max received a message from Jason. It was urgent. "Meet me in the back parking lot. We've got a problem. Lucas and his crew are here, and they're looking for a fight." Max looked over at Mia. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Let's show them we're not backing down," Max said, his voice resolute. And so, they headed toward the back parking lot, knowing that the next test of their resolve was waiting for them. The air was thick with tension as Max and Mia walked through the back parking lot, the sounds of their footsteps drowned out by the soft hum of distant traffic. Their breath came in shallow bursts, not from fear, but anticipation. They were about to face Lucas and his crew again, but this time, it wasn't just about standing up for themselves, it was about defending something bigger. The resistance wasn't just about physical strength, it was about their strength in numbers, their collective will to change the school. They rounded the corner, and there they were. Lucas, flanked by his usual gang of followers, leaned against a rusty old car, his arms crossed. His eyes were hard, but there was something new in them. It was no longer the cocky arrogance of someone who thought they had the upper hand, but a simmering frustration, the kind of anger that came from being challenged. "You really think you can change anything around here?" Lucas called out as soon as he saw them. Max stepped forward, his fists clenched but his expression calm. "We already have," he said, his voice steady. "And we're not done yet." Lucas snorted, stepping away from the car. "Don't kid yourselves. You're just a couple of kids who got lucky. You think you can take on everyone who's ever put you down? You're in way over your heads." Mia took a deep breath and spoke up, her tone unwavering. "We're not just fighting for us, Lucas. We're fighting for everyone who's ever been ignored or pushed around. The school doesn't belong to you or your crew anymore." Lucas's eyes narrowed, and his fists clenched. "You think you've got what it takes to change anything? You really think people are going to follow you? You're just a bunch of misfits." Max felt his blood boil at the insult, but he didn't let it show. He took another step forward. "We've got more people than you think. And we're not going anywhere. If you want to keep bullying people, fine, but you're going to have to go through us." For a moment, the parking lot was silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Then, Lucas laughed, a dark, mocking sound. "You really think you can stop me? I've got friends. I've got power." Mia's expression remained unreadable as she spoke. "You have nothing compared to what we have: unity, strength in numbers, and something you'll never understand: respect." Lucas's laughter died in his throat. The frustration in his face deepened, and he stepped closer, his chest heaving with barely contained anger. "You think you've earned respect? You've only earned my contempt." And that's when it happened. A fight broke out, not just between Max and Lucas, but between their ideals. Lucas lunged forward, but Max was ready. He sidestepped just in time, his body fluid and controlled, a reflection of the martial arts discipline he'd trained in for years. Lucas staggered, barely regaining his footing before he swung again, a wild, desperate punch. Max blocked it, but the force of the strike pushed him back a few steps. Meanwhile, Mia was facing off with one of Lucas's friends, a guy named Jake, who had always been quick to back up his leader. But Mia wasn't the same person she used to be. She was faster, more confident, and every move she made was calculated. Jake swung a punch, but Mia ducked, using his momentum against him to flip him onto the ground in one smooth motion. As the skirmish continued, Lucas was starting to realize that this wasn't going to be the easy fight he had envisioned. Max and Mia weren't just defending themselves, they were defending the people who couldn't fight back. They were fighting for something greater than victory or defeat. They were fighting for a future where no one would ever have to feel powerless again. The fight wasn't over, but something had shifted. Max and Mia were in control now, but they knew this wouldn't last forever. Lucas and his crew might back off for the moment, but they weren't done yet. The true test was still to come. As the fight continued, more students began to filter into the parking lot, drawn by the noise. They stood on the edges, hesitant but watching, unsure whether to intervene or stay back. But with each punch, each block, Max and Mia were slowly, subtly making their point. They weren't alone. One by one, the students began to cheer them on. Some of them had been too scared to speak up before, too afraid of what would happen if they sided with the twins. But now, they saw the power in standing together. And as the crowd grew, so did their courage. Max caught a glimpse of Jason in the crowd, nodding in encouragement. And then, to his surprise, Jason stepped forward. "Lucas!" Jason shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You're outnumbered. It's over. Step back." Lucas froze. The words were simple, but they held weight. Jason wasn't just a spectator. He had been with them, helping to build the resistance. And now, here he was, standing with Max and Mia. "Not today, Lucas," Jason added, his tone firm. There was a brief silence as Lucas looked around, the realization settling in. His crew wasn't going to back him up anymore. The resistance had spread too far, and the tide had turned. The respect Max and Mia had fought for was real, and it wasn't going away. Lucas's eyes flickered with a mix of rage and confusion. Then, slowly, he took a step back. "This isn't over," he growled under his breath, but there was a sense of defeat in his voice. "You'll regret this." And with that, he and his gang retreated, disappearing into the school building, leaving Max, Mia, and their newfound allies standing tall in the parking lot. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, they felt like they had won. As the crowd dispersed, the air was thick with the kind of quiet that follows a storm. There were no cheers, no loud celebrations, just a shared understanding that something significant had just happened. Max turned to Mia, and for the first time since the fight began, they both allowed themselves a moment to breathe. "We did it," Max said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and relief. Mia gave him a small smile, but it was full of strength. "We've only just begun." Jason clapped them both on the shoulder. "You've earned this, both of you. This isn't just your win, it's everyone's. You showed us all what it means to stand together." Max nodded, looking out across the parking lot. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore, Jason. We're fighting for all of us." Mia turned to him, her eyes shining with determination. "And we won't stop until we've changed everything." The school buzzed with a newfound energy in the days following the confrontation in the parking lot. Whispers echoed through the hallways, spreading like wildfire. Max and Mia had stood their ground, not just against Lucas and his crew, but against the entire culture of fear and silence that had long dominated the school. The resistance was no longer just a group of misfits, it was a movement, and it was growing stronger every day. But even as their influence spread, Max and Mia knew that the battle was far from over. The fight wasn't just about defending themselves or taking down Lucas, it was about creating lasting change, about building a school where everyone could stand up for themselves without fear of retribution. One afternoon, Max sat in the library, his eyes scanning the pages of a book, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the resistance, about what they had accomplished, and what still lay ahead. Mia was supposed to meet him after school, but she hadn't arrived yet. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. A text from Jason. "We need to talk. Meet me at the usual spot after school. It's important." Max frowned, a sense of unease creeping up on him. What was going on? He had no time to dwell on it, though. The school bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, and Max gathered his things. He stuffed his phone in his pocket and headed out the door. Jason was waiting by the old oak tree at the back of the school. His expression was serious, his usual relaxed demeanor replaced by a look of concern. "What's going on, Jason?" Max asked, his voice laced with worry. "You sounded urgent in the text." Jason glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot. "It's about Lucas." Max's stomach dropped. "What now?" Jason leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's planning something. He's not just going to sit back and accept defeat like this. He's gone to the principal. And he's bringing in some serious reinforcements. He's trying to turn things around, Max. If we don't act fast, the resistance could be in real danger." Max's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you mean? How serious is this?" "I overheard him talking with some of his friends. He's trying to gather a group of people who are still loyal to him. He wants to come after the resistance. Hard. And he's got some of the school's most influential people backing him. If we don't move quickly, we could lose everything." Max stood there for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. They had come so far. They couldn't let it all fall apart now. He thought about Mia, about the progress they had made, and about everyone who had believed in them. They couldn't let Lucas take it all away. "We need to get ahead of this," Max said, his voice resolute. "We'll meet with Mia and the others. We need to plan our next move. If he wants a fight, we'll give him one." Max and Mia met with Jason later that afternoon in the same quiet corner of the library where they had first started organizing the resistance. This time, the atmosphere was different. There was no excitement, no sense of triumph. Only tension. "We've got a problem," Max said, his voice low. "Lucas is gearing up for something big. He's talking to the principal and trying to rally his supporters. He's coming after us." Mia clenched her fists. "We knew this wasn't going to be easy. But if he thinks we're going to back down, he's wrong." "We can't let this drag on," Jason added. "We need to hit back, but we need to be smart about it. This isn't just a fight anymore, it's a battle for control of this school. And we can't afford to lose." Max nodded. "We won't. But we need to be strategic. We've got a lot of people on our side now. It's time to make sure they're ready to stand with us when things get rough." The next few days were a blur of planning, strategizing, and preparing. The resistance had grown in size and strength, but with Lucas's allies closing in, Max and Mia knew they had to be ready for anything. They couldn't afford to hesitate. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The day of the final showdown arrived sooner than they expected. Word had spread through the school, Lucas was staging an all-out attack, and he was ready to bring the full force of his supporters with him. But Max and Mia were ready. They had trained, recruited, and prepared for this moment. The resistance gathered in the gym, their eyes focused, their hearts set on one goal, to take back control of their school. Max and Mia stood at the front, their presence commanding attention, as the others filed in, each one ready to do their part. "This is it," Mia said, her voice calm but filled with determination. "We've come a long way. And now, we fight for everything we've built. For each other. For our futures." Max stepped forward, his hands raised. "We're not here to destroy. We're here to protect. Protect our friends, our school, and the people who believe in what we stand for. This is our home, and no one is going to take it from us." With those words, the gym erupted in applause, a unified show of strength that sent a clear message to everyone: the resistance was not backing down. The confrontation took place in the heart of the school, the hallway where it had all started, where Max and Mia had first been targeted. But this time, they were not alone. They were surrounded by their allies, their friends, the people they had fought for, and the people who had joined them along the way. Lucas and his gang approached, their faces full of arrogance, but there was something different about them now. They could see the resistance had grown stronger. They weren't dealing with the same scared, isolated kids they had once picked on. Max, Mia, and the rest of their allies stood together, ready to defend what they had built. Lucas sneered. "This ends today. You think you've won, but you've just made yourselves targets." Mia stepped forward. "We're not afraid of you anymore, Lucas. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about standing up for what's right. And we'll never back down." Max stood beside her. "You might have started this fight, but we're going to finish it. This school belongs to all of us. Not just you." The tension in the hallway was palpable as the two sides faced off, but for the first time, Lucas hesitated. The people around him, his supporters, looked unsure. They weren't as sure of themselves anymore. They had seen the unity, the strength, and the courage of the resistance. They had seen how Max and Mia had stood tall, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had ever been too afraid to speak up. The final confrontation didn't end in the way anyone had expected. Instead of fists flying and chaos erupting, there was a shift, an understanding. Lucas and his supporters realized they had lost. Not just a battle, but the war for control. They weren't the ones people followed anymore. They weren't the ones who commanded respect. Lucas looked around at his crew and then back at Max and Mia. His posture slumped slightly, the fight drained out of him. "This isn't over," he muttered, but it was clear he knew the fight had already been decided. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his supporters following him, leaving the resistance standing strong, victorious. Max and Mia exchanged a look, their faces a mix of relief and exhaustion. They had done it. They had won, not just through strength, but through unity, respect, and the unwavering belief that they could make a difference. As they walked away from the confrontation, the school buzzed with the news of what had just transpired. The resistance had triumphed, and with it, a new era had begun. The school year ended on a high note. Max and Mia, now respected leaders, continued their mission to make the school a safer place for everyone. Their efforts had sparked a movement, one that would continue long after they graduated. They knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they were ready for whatever came next. And as they walked across the stage at graduation, hand in hand, they knew they had done something no one could take from them, they had changed the world around them. The future was theirs, and for the first time, they felt truly free. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?